You've been lied to about overthinking. They told you it means you are careful, responsible, intelligent, someone who plans ahead, someone who refuses to make mistakes. But if that were true, why does your mind refuse to rest? Why do the same thoughts return again and again? Why does thinking more rarely make you feel safer? Why does the mind keep searching, analyzing, predicting, replaying conversations, imagining problems that may never happen? The truth is something most people never realize. Overthinking is the mind searching for safety in the wrong place. The mind believes that if it studies every possibility, if it examines every past mistake, if it prepares for every future danger, then finally it will relax. Finally, it will feel secure. But the opposite happens. The more the mind searches for safety through thinking, the more restless it becomes. The more it doubts, the more it questions, the more it spins in endless circles. Buddhist wisdom understood this long before modern psychology existed. The mind suffers not because life is uncertain, but because it keeps trying to escape uncertainty through endless thought. For centuries, Buddhist teachers quietly observed the mind and discovered something powerful. Peace does not appear when the mind finally solves everything. Peace appears when the mind stops searching for safety inside its own thoughts. Tonight, as you listen, something subtle may begin to shift. The constant noise of analysis may begin to soften. The pressure created by endless mental loops may start to loosen, and the mind may slowly discover a surprising truth. Safety was never hidden inside more thinking. It was hidden inside awareness. This is not just a talk about overthinking. This is an invitation to understand why the mind keeps searching, why it struggles to rest, and how Buddhist wisdom gently guides it back to stillness. And as this understanding grows, something remarkable begins to happen. The mind stops chasing certainty, the weight of constant analysis begins to fade, and a deeper calm quietly appears, not because life suddenly becomes predictable, but because the mind finally stops searching for safety in the wrong place. And so allow the body to relax. Let the mind become curious, because what you are about to hear may slowly change the way you understand your thoughts, your worries, and the search for peace itself. Now, let's begin. The mind has just begun to see something important. The restless movement of thought, the constant analyzing and predicting, the quiet pressure to prepare for every possible outcome. All of it feels like protection. It feels responsible. It feels wise. Yet beneath that effort, something deeper is happening. The mind is trying to build safety out of thinking itself. And this is where one of the most subtle illusions begins. Before the mind learns how to release overthinking, it must first understand why it clings to it so tightly. Because hidden inside that endless stream of thoughts is a quiet belief that shapes everything. A belief that if the mind just thinks long enough, it can control what comes next, and that is where the first door begins to open. There is a quiet tension many people carry every day. It appears in small moments, when a decision must be made, when a conversation ends awkwardly, when the future feels uncertain. Suddenly, the mind begins to move. Thoughts start multiplying. Possibilities appear one after another. The mind studies them carefully, as if somewhere inside those thoughts lies the perfect answer that will protect everything. This movement feels intelligent. It feels responsible. It feels like preparation. But beneath it lives something much more fragile. The mind is searching for control. Overthinking often begins with a simple belief. If every possibility is examined carefully enough, then nothing will go wrong. If the mind can just replay events enough times, it will discover what should have been said. If every future scenario is predicted, then pain can be avoided. At first glance, this belief seems reasonable. After all, thinking has helped humanity survive. Planning helps people prepare. Reflection helps people learn. But overthinking quietly transforms a useful tool into a prison. Instead of helping the mind move forward, it traps attention in circles. Buddhist teachings observed this pattern long ago. The mind does not simply think to understand reality. Often the mind thinks because it is afraid of not controlling reality. This fear is subtle. It rarely announces itself loudly. Instead, it disguises itself as responsibility. It whispers that thinking more will keep things safe. It promises that careful analysis will prevent mistakes. It convinces the mind that peace exists somewhere at the end of one more thought, but peace never arrives, because the future has never been controlled by thought. The mind may analyze every detail of tomorrow, yet tomorrow still unfolds according to countless conditions outside its control. Weather changes, people act in unexpected ways, opportunities appear without warning, plans collapse without explanation, reality continues moving. Meanwhile, the mind sits in its endless attempt to calculate what cannot be calculated. This is where overthinking begins to drain energy. Each thought promises clarity, yet each thought produces another question. The mind examines one scenario, then immediately imagines another. Every possible outcome must be considered, every mistake must be prevented, every uncertainty must be solved, but uncertainty never disappears. So, the mind keeps thinking. This creates a strange experience. The mind feels busy. It feels productive. It feels like it is working hard to protect life from problems. Yet emotionally, it feels exhausted. The body becomes tense. The breath becomes shallow. Sleep becomes difficult. Joy quietly disappears. The mind is working harder than ever, yet peace feels further away. Buddhist wisdom describes this pattern as attachment to control. The mind becomes attached to the idea that safety comes from predicting and managing the future. But this attachment creates suffering because the future has never been fully predictable. One of the deepest teachings of Buddhism is impermanence. Everything changes. Every situation evolves. Every moment passes. Every plan interacts with forces beyond personal control. Life moves like a river, constantly shifting direction. But the thinking mind often refuses to accept this movement. Instead, it attempts to freeze the river. It wants guarantees. It wants certainty. It wants proof that nothing will go wrong. And when those guarantees cannot be found, the mind responds with more thinking. This is where the illusion becomes powerful. Overthinking convinces the mind that more thought equals more control. But what it actually produces is more anxiety. Each attempt to control the future reminds the mind how uncertain the future truly is. So the mind thinks even more. It studies conversations from yesterday. It replays them again and again, searching for the exact sentence that should have been spoken differently. Perhaps if the words had changed slightly, the outcome would have changed too, but the past remains unchanged. The mind imagines conversations that may happen tomorrow. It rehearses responses, predicts reactions, and prepares for every emotional possibility. Perhaps if every answer is prepared in advance, embarrassment can be avoided, but tomorrow has not arrived. The mind plans decisions weeks into the future. It studies every option, every risk, every possible consequence. Perhaps the perfect decision exists somewhere inside this endless analysis, but life rarely presents perfect options. So the mind continues thinking. This constant movement creates a strange paradox. The mind believes it is solving problems, yet it often creates new problems through the act of thinking itself. A simple decision becomes complicated. A small uncertainty becomes a source of anxiety. A passing thought becomes a long emotional struggle. Overthinking does not simply observe reality, it magnifies it. The mind becomes like a magnifying glass held over every detail of life. Small imperfections suddenly appear enormous. Uncertain outcomes begin to feel dangerous. Possibilities multiply until the mind feels overwhelmed by choices. And yet, The mind still believes thinking is the solution. Buddhist teachings invite a very different perspective. Instead of asking how to control the future, Buddhism asks a quieter question. What happens when the mind stops trying to control it? At first, this idea feels uncomfortable. The thinking mind fears letting go of control. It believes that without constant analysis, mistakes will multiply, problems will appear, chaos will take over. But careful observation reveals something surprising. Much of life has always unfolded without the help of constant thinking. The heart beats without instructions. The lungs breathe without calculation. The body moves through thousands of actions each day without analyzing every step. Conversations flow naturally when the mind is relaxed. Life already knows how to move. Overthinking interrupts that natural movement. It inserts itself into moments that would otherwise unfold smoothly. It questions instincts that would otherwise guide decisions. It replaces simple presence with endless internal debate. The mind becomes so focused on controlling life that it forgets how to experience it. Buddhist meditation practices were designed to reveal this pattern. When a person sits quietly and observes the mind, something fascinating becomes clear. Thoughts arise on their own. They appear without invitation. They continue for a moment, then they fade. Another thought appears, then another. None of these thoughts required effort to begin. None required effort to end. They move through awareness like clouds passing through the sky. But when the mind becomes attached to control, it begins chasing those clouds. It tries to shape them. It tries to organize them. It tries to make them permanent. And that chase becomes exhausting. One of the most powerful insights in Buddhist wisdom is the realization that thoughts themselves are not the problem. Thoughts are natural. They appear and disappear constantly. The suffering comes from believing that every thought must be followed, solved, or controlled. Overthinking happens when the mind refuses to let a thought pass. Instead, it grabs the thought and begins analyzing it. Then another thought appears connected to the first one. Soon a chain of thinking begins. The mind travels far from the present moment. What began as a small thought becomes an entire mental journey. The illusion of control keeps that journey going. The mind believes that if it continues thinking long enough, it will eventually reach certainty. But certainty never appears, because the future was never meant to be solved in advance. Life unfolds through experience, not through prediction. This is where Buddhist wisdom gently shifts perspective. Instead of trying to remove uncertainty, it teaches the mind how to coexist with it peacefully. Instead of fighting the natural movement of life, it encourages awareness of the present moment. When awareness returns to the present, something remarkable happens. The mind begins to see that the current moment is usually far simpler than the stories created by overthinking. Right now, in this moment, most fears about the future do not exist yet. Most regrets about the past are not happening again. Only the present moment exists, and within that moment, there is often far more calm than the mind expected. This does not mean planning should disappear entirely. Practical thinking remains useful. Decisions still need attention. Responsibilities still require preparation. But there is a difference between thoughtful reflection and compulsive overthinking. Reflection is calm. It gathers information and then releases the question. Overthinking is restless. It repeats the same question again and again, hoping the answer will change. Reflection ends when understanding appears. Overthinking continues, even when nothing new is discovered. Recognizing this difference begins to weaken the illusion of control. The mind starts to notice when thinking becomes repetitive. It notices when analysis stops producing insight and begins producing tension. At that moment, awareness has an opportunity to return. Instead of chasing another thought, the mind can pause. The breath can be felt again. The body can relax slightly. Attention can return to the simple experience of the present moment. The illusion of control begins to loosen. Life continues moving just as it always has. Decisions will still be made. Conversations will still happen. Challenges will still appear. But the mind no longer tries to control every outcome through endless thought. Instead, it learns something much more powerful. It learns how to trust the unfolding of life itself. And as that trust begins to grow, the grip of overthinking slowly begins to fade. The illusion of control slowly begins to weaken when the mind realizes something important. No amount of thinking can completely shape the future. No mental calculation can guarantee that life will unfold exactly as planned. When this truth becomes clear, something interesting happens. The mind does not immediately relax. Instead, another force begins to appear. The mind starts looking at uncertainty itself. It begins asking a quiet but powerful question. If the future cannot be controlled, then how can safety be found? This is where another hidden pattern of the mind becomes visible. Because the mind has a strange habit. When it encounters uncertainty, it rarely treats it as something neutral. Instead, it often treats it as something dangerous. And this misunderstanding quietly fuels much of the overthinking people experience every day. A strange tension appears the moment the future becomes unclear. The body may feel tight without explanation. The mind begins scanning for answers. Thoughts start multiplying, searching for explanations, possibilities, and hidden risks. Nothing dangerous has actually happened yet, but the mind behaves as if danger is already close. This reaction feels natural, almost automatic. Yet when examined closely, it reveals something fascinating about the human mind. The mind often confuses uncertainty with danger. Something unknown appears, and the brain immediately begins to treat it as a threat that must be solved. The result is a flood of thinking designed to eliminate that uncertainty as quickly as possible. From a biological perspective, this reaction has deep roots. Thousands of years ago, human survival depended on quick responses to unknown situations. When early humans heard a strange sound in the forest, it was safer to assume danger than to assume safety. A hidden predator could mean life or death. The brain learned to respond quickly to uncertainty by preparing for threats. That survival mechanism was incredibly useful in ancient environments. But the modern world is very different from the ancient wilderness. Today, most uncertainty does not involve physical survival. It involves social interactions, career decisions, relationships, and personal identity. Yet the brain still reacts with the same ancient alarm system. An unanswered message becomes a possible rejection. An uncertain future becomes a possible failure. A small mistake becomes a possible disaster. The mind begins scanning every possibility, trying to eliminate risk before anything happens. Overthinking is often the mind attempting to calm that internal alarm. When uncertainty appears, the brain believes that thinking harder will remove the danger. If the situation can be fully understood, then safety can return. If every possibility can be predicted, then the threat will disappear. But the opposite usually happens. Each attempt to solve uncertainty creates more possibilities. Each possibility leads to another question. Instead of removing danger, the mind amplifies the sense that something must be wrong. This creates the strange emotional experience many people recognize. A small, unknown situation begins to feel much larger than it actually is. The mind builds entire stories around it. Hours may pass while the brain searches for explanations that may not even exist. Yet, in reality, nothing has actually happened. The threat exists only in the mind's interpretation of uncertainty. Buddhist wisdom noticed this pattern long before modern psychology studied it. Buddhist teachings describe the human mind as naturally inclined to resist the unknown. The mind seeks certainty because certainty feels stable. When stability disappears, the mind becomes restless. But Buddhism also points out something deeply important. Uncertainty is not the enemy. Uncertainty is simply the nature of life. Everything that exists is constantly changing. Situations evolve, relationships shift, opportunities appear and disappear. The future has never been fixed, and it never will be. Yet the mind continues trying to freeze life into predictable patterns. This effort creates suffering. When uncertainty appears, the mind believes something must be wrong. It begins searching for explanations, solutions, guarantees. But uncertainty itself is not a problem. It is simply reality unfolding. The problem begins when the mind refuses to accept that unfolding. This is where awareness becomes powerful. Awareness allows the mind to observe uncertainty without immediately reacting to it as danger. Instead of rushing into analysis, the mind pauses. Instead of assuming something bad will happen, it simply notices the feeling of not knowing. At first, this feels uncomfortable. The mind has been trained to eliminate uncertainty quickly. Sitting with it may feel unfamiliar. But slowly, something interesting begins to happen. The body starts to relax. The breath becomes slower. The mind begins to see that uncertainty itself is not causing harm. It is simply a space where the future has not yet arrived. Buddhist meditation practices often involve observing these moments carefully. When uncertainty appears, the instruction is not to solve it immediately. The instruction is to watch the reaction of the mind. A thought appears. Something might go wrong. Another thought appears. What if this becomes a problem? Another thought follows. Maybe I should analyze it more carefully. By observing this chain of reactions, the mind begins to see how quickly it transforms uncertainty into fear. This observation weakens the false alarm system. The brain begins to realize that many of its warnings are not signals of real danger. They are habits formed by old survival patterns. The more awareness grows, the more clearly the mind can distinguish between genuine threats and imagined ones. Real danger produces immediate signals in the body. Heart rate increases sharply. The senses become alert. Action becomes necessary. But uncertainty without real danger feels different. It produces restless thinking rather than urgent action. It produces questions rather than clear responses. When the mind learns to recognize this difference, a new kind of freedom begins to appear. Instead of treating every unknown as an emergency, the mind allows space for life to unfold naturally. This does not mean ignoring important decisions. It means responding to them calmly rather than reactively. It means recognizing when thinking is helpful and when thinking is simply feeding anxiety. One of the most powerful Buddhist insights is that the mind often creates its own suffering through resistance to uncertainty. The mind wants guarantees. It wants promises that the future will behave in certain ways. It wants assurance that pain will not appear. But life does not offer those guarantees. When the mind accepts this truth, something remarkable happens. The need to eliminate uncertainty begins to dissolve. The mind no longer fights the unknown as if it were an enemy. Instead, uncertainty becomes a natural part of experience. Many moments in life become lighter when this understanding develops. Waiting for an answer becomes less stressful. Decisions feel less overwhelming. The future feels less like a battlefield that must be controlled. The mind begins to trust something deeper than prediction. It begins to trust awareness itself. Awareness does not need certainty to remain calm. It simply observes what is happening in each moment. If a challenge appears, awareness responds. If the situation changes, awareness adapts. This flexibility replaces the rigid search for guarantees. Over time, the brain's alarm system begins to quiet. The mind realizes that uncertainty does not automatically mean danger. It becomes more comfortable resting in the present moment rather than chasing imagined futures. This change does not happen instantly. The habit of treating uncertainty as threat has been reinforced for years, sometimes decades. But every moment of awareness weakens that habit slightly. Each time the mind notices uncertainty without reacting with panic, the nervous system learns something new. It learns that the unknown can exist without immediate harm. Gradually, the internal environment becomes calmer. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer dominate attention. Questions still arise, but they no longer create endless loops. The mind becomes more like an open sky where thoughts pass through rather than storms that must be controlled. This transformation changes how life is experienced. Instead of living in constant preparation for possible danger, the mind becomes available to the present moment. Simple experiences become more vivid, conversations feel more genuine, decisions become clearer because they are no longer clouded by excessive fear. Uncertainty remains part of life, but it no longer feels like a threat that must be defeated. It becomes a space where possibility exists. And as the mind learns to rest inside that space, the restless search for safety begins to fade. The mind is beginning to see something important. Not every unknown situation is dangerous. Many of the alarms the mind produces are simply habits, echoes of an ancient survival system that still tries to protect us from things that are no longer threats. As awareness grows, the mind slowly learns to sit with uncertainty instead of immediately fighting it. The storm of imagined futures begins to quiet down. But when the future stops demanding all of the mind's attention, another direction of thinking often appears. The mind turns backward. Instead of predicting what might happen, it begins revisiting what has already happened. A conversation from yesterday suddenly reappears. A decision made years ago returns with uncomfortable clarity. A moment of embarrassment, regret, or confusion begins replaying again and again. The mind quietly asks a painful question: what if things had been different? And this is where another powerful habit of overthinking begins to reveal itself. A strange thing happens inside the mind when a memory appears. The event itself has already passed. The moment is gone. The people involved have moved forward with their lives. The world has continued turning without pause. Yet inside the mind, the event begins to live again. A single memory returns, and suddenly the mind starts reconstructing the entire moment. Words are replayed, facial expressions are remembered, the environment is reconstructed with surprising detail. The mind studies the memory as if it were a scene frozen in time. At first, this replay seems harmless. It feels like reflection. It feels like learning. After all, remembering the past can help people grow and understand their mistakes. But something subtle happens when reflection becomes repetition. Instead of learning from the past, the mind begins trying to rewrite it. The mind starts imagining different outcomes. It begins inserting new words into old conversations. It constructs alternate versions of events where everything turns out better. Perhaps if those words had been said differently, the conversation would have changed. Perhaps if that decision had been delayed, life would have unfolded in a better direction. Perhaps if that opportunity had been accepted, everything would feel different today. The mind explores these alternate timelines carefully. Each possibility becomes a small mental experiment. The brain analyzes the past like a puzzle, searching for the missing piece that would explain everything. But the missing piece does not exist, because the past cannot be changed. This is where the habit becomes painful. The mind continues returning to the same memory, hoping that one more examination will produce a different conclusion. But every replay leads to the same reality. The moment has already passed. Still, the mind refuses to stop. This pattern is extremely common in overthinking. When the future feels uncertain and the present feels uncomfortable, the mind seeks stability somewhere else. The past becomes that place. The past feels solid because it has already happened. The events are known. The outcomes are clear. The mind believes that by studying the past carefully enough, it can prevent similar pain from happening again. But something deeper is happening beneath that belief. The mind is struggling with regret. Regret is one of the most powerful emotions connected to overthinking. It appears when the mind compares what happened with what could have happened. That comparison creates tension. The mind becomes trapped between two realities. One reality is the actual past. The other is the imagined past. The imagined past is often kinder. In that version, the perfect words are spoken. The correct decision is made. The opportunity is recognized at the right moment. Relationships unfold smoothly. Success appears naturally. But that imagined past is only a story. The real past remains unchanged. Buddhist wisdom offers a very direct observation about this pattern. The mind suffers not because the past exists, but because it resists allowing the past to remain exactly as it is. When the mind refuses to accept what has already happened, it begins fighting with reality itself. This fight produces endless thinking. Every replay of a memory is an attempt to negotiate with the past. The mind asks questions that have no answers. Why did that happen? What if things had gone differently? How could that mistake have been avoided? These questions seem meaningful, but when repeated endlessly, they do not bring peace. Instead, they keep the mind emotionally tied to moments that are already gone. The more energy the mind spends revisiting those memories, the less energy remains for the present moment. Life continues moving forward, but attention remains stuck behind. Buddhist teachings describe this as attachment to the past. Attachment does not mean remembering something. Memory itself is natural. Attachment means the mind refuses to release the emotional grip on what happened. It keeps returning to the same moment as if something unfinished still exists there. But the past has no unfinished business. It has already completed itself. Every event that has happened in life arrived through countless conditions. Decisions were influenced by emotions, knowledge, circumstances, and limitations that existed in that moment. People acted according to the understanding they had at the time. Looking backward with new knowledge often creates the illusion that different choices were obvious. But in the moment those decisions were made, the future was not visible. This realization begins to soften the weight of regret. The mind starts recognizing that past actions were the result of countless conditions interacting together. No single decision existed in isolation. When this understanding grows deeper, compassion begins to appear. Instead of attacking the past self for mistakes, the mind begins to see that the past self was simply navigating life with the awareness available at that time. The person who made those decisions no longer exists exactly as they were. Every experience since then has changed the mind. Every lesson has reshaped understanding. Every challenge has added wisdom. The present version of the mind has knowledge that the past version did not possess. Expecting the past self to behave with present knowledge creates an impossible standard. This realization gently weakens the urge to replay the past. Another insight begins to emerge. The past is not actually being experienced when it is replayed in the mind. Only thoughts about the past are being experienced. Those thoughts may feel vivid, but they are not the original moment. They are simply mental images appearing in awareness. When this becomes clear, something powerful happens. The mind begins separating the memory from reality. The memory becomes recognized as a thought event rather than a living experience. It appears, it stays for a moment, and it eventually fades. Just like every other thought. Buddhist meditation practices often focus on observing this process carefully. When a memory appears, the instruction is not to suppress it. Instead, the instruction is to notice it with awareness. The mind sees the memory arise. It notices the emotions connected to it. It observes the urge to analyze or replay the event. And then it simply allows the memory to pass. No argument is required, no correction is necessary. The memory moves through awareness like a cloud passing through the sky. At first, this feels difficult because the mind is accustomed to engaging every thought. But slowly, the space between awareness and thought becomes clearer. The mind realizes that it does not have to follow every memory that appears. It can simply watch. This watching transforms the relationship with the past. Memories still exist, but they no longer dominate attention. Regret still appears occasionally, but it does not create endless loops of thinking. The past becomes a source of understanding rather than a prison of replay. Peace begins to grow in that space. The mind finally stops asking the past to become different. Instead, it begins asking a different question. What is happening right now? When attention returns to the present moment, something remarkable becomes visible. The past is not occurring anymore. The body is breathing. The environment is alive with sound and movement. Life is unfolding in real time. The mind begins to experience something it had forgotten during its endless replays. The present moment is still available. And within that present moment, the past has no power to change anything. Only awareness exists, only the current breath, only the quiet unfolding of life. This realization does not erase memories. It simply removes their ability to dominate the mind. The past becomes part of the story of life rather than the center of attention. And as the mind learns to let the past remain unchanged, a deeper calm begins to appear. Because peace was never hidden inside rewriting yesterday. Peace was waiting in the moment the mind finally stopped trying. The mind has begun to understand something important. The future cannot be fully controlled, and the past cannot be rewritten. When these realizations slowly sink in, some of the pressure that fuels overthinking begins to loosen. The mind no longer needs to predict every outcome, and it no longer needs to replay every old memory, searching for a different ending. Yet overthinking still finds ways to appear. Even when the future is accepted as uncertain and the past is allowed to remain unchanged, the mind continues producing long chains of thought. Something else is quietly driving the process, something more personal than uncertainty and more emotional than regret. It has to do with how the mind sees itself, because hidden beneath many thoughts is a silent question the mind is constantly trying to answer. What kind of person am I? This question may not appear clearly, but it quietly shapes many of the thoughts people experience every day. The mind builds a picture of who it believes it is. This picture becomes the foundation of identity. Identity is the story the mind tells about itself. It includes beliefs like being intelligent, responsible, kind, successful, capable, or strong. These ideas help the mind feel stable. They create the sense that the self is something solid and understandable, but once the mind builds this identity, it begins trying to protect it. This protection often happens through thinking. A moment of criticism from another person may appear small on the surface. Someone makes a comment that questions a decision or points out a mistake. The event itself lasts only a few seconds, but the mind reacts strongly. The comment begins replaying in thought. The mind examines every word. It studies the tone of voice. It analyzes the possible meaning behind the message. Suddenly, a simple conversation becomes an entire mental investigation. Why does this happen? Because the comment touched the mind's image of itself. The ego, which is the part of the mind that organizes identity, quickly tries to restore stability. It begins producing thoughts designed to defend or explain the self-image that feels threatened. Perhaps the other person misunderstood. Perhaps they were wrong. Perhaps the situation was not fully explained. Perhaps the mind needs to prove that the criticism was unfair. Each of these possibilities produces more thinking. This is one of the subtle ways overthinking begins. It is not always about solving problems. Sometimes it is about protecting the story the mind tells about who it is. Buddhist wisdom describes this process clearly. According to Buddhist teachings, the sense of a fixed and permanent self is largely an illusion created by the mind. The mind gathers experiences, memories, beliefs, and roles, then organizes them into a narrative that feels like a solid identity. But this identity is constantly changing. Every experience reshapes it. Every new situation reveals something different about the person. No single definition can fully capture what a human being is. Yet the mind tries to maintain a stable picture. This effort creates tension because reality does not remain fixed. Situations change, people change, skills grow and sometimes disappear. Success and failure alternate. The mind attempts to hold on to an image that reality keeps reshaping. Overthinking becomes one of the tools used to maintain that image. When something challenges the identity the mind prefers, thinking increases. The mind begins analyzing the situation again and again, searching for ways to restore the version of the self it wants to believe in. This pattern appears in many areas of life. Someone who believes they must always appear competent may replay a mistake repeatedly. The mind tries to understand how the error happened and how it can be explained or hidden. The mistake itself may be small, but the identity feels threatened. Another person may believe they must always be liked by others. When a social interaction feels awkward, the mind begins reviewing every detail. It examines every word spoken during the conversation. It studies facial expressions. It searches for clues about whether the other person approved or disapproved. The mind is not just analyzing the situation, it is protecting the image of being liked. This process creates endless thinking because identity is fragile when it depends on external validation. The mind constantly monitors how others respond, looking for confirmation that the self-image remains intact. Buddhist teachings approach this situation differently. Instead of strengthening identity, Buddhism invites the mind to observe identity itself. When awareness becomes curious about the sense of self, something surprising appears. The identity the mind defends so fiercely is not a solid object. It is a collection of thoughts, memories, and interpretations that constantly shift. A person may describe themselves as confident, but moments of doubt still appear. Someone may believe they are calm, yet anger occasionally arises. Another may think they are shy, but sometimes they speak boldly when necessary. Identity is fluid, but the mind prefers stability. It tries to freeze identity into fixed descriptions. When reality contradicts those descriptions, overthinking begins. The mind attempts to reconcile the difference. For example, if someone believes they are always careful and responsible, making a mistake becomes uncomfortable. The mind begins searching for explanations that preserve the identity. Perhaps the mistake occurred because of unusual circumstances. Perhaps someone else caused the problem. Perhaps the situation was misunderstood. The mind analyzes every detail until it finds a story that protects the identity it prefers. But this effort requires constant thinking. Each challenge to identity triggers another cycle of analysis. Over time, the mind becomes exhausted from defending an image that cannot remain perfectly stable. Buddhist insight introduces a different possibility. Instead of defending identity, the mind can learn to observe it. When awareness notices the thoughts that describe the self, it begins to see how temporary they are. A thought appears, saying, "I am successful." Later, another thought appears, saying, "I am failing." Both thoughts feel convincing in the moment, yet both are simply mental constructions. The self that the mind tries to define is always changing. When this becomes clear, the need to protect identity begins to soften. Criticism becomes easier to hear because it no longer threatens a rigid self-image. Mistakes become opportunities for learning rather than evidence of personal failure. Social interactions become less stressful because the mind no longer needs constant approval to confirm its identity. This shift dramatically reduces overthinking. The mind no longer analyzes every situation for signs that the identity is safe or endangered. Thoughts become lighter because they are not carrying the weight of protecting the self. Buddhist teachings often describe this freedom as the realization of non-self. This does not mean a person disappears or loses individuality. Instead, it means recognizing that identity is a flexible process, rather than a fixed structure. The mind becomes less attached to labels. Instead of thinking, "I must always be this kind of person," the mind becomes open to change and growth. Identity becomes something that evolves naturally rather than something that must be defended constantly. This openness reduces mental tension. Situations that once triggered long cycles of analysis begin to pass more easily. The mind no longer needs to prove its worth through endless thinking. It simply experiences what is happening. Another important insight appears as awareness deepens. Many thoughts about identity are not even chosen intentionally. They arise automatically based on past conditioning. Cultural expectations, family influences, and personal experiences all contribute to the stories the mind tells about itself. These stories feel personal, yet they were shaped by countless external factors. Recognizing this helps loosen attachment even further. If identity is partly constructed by influences outside personal control, then defending it with constant thinking becomes unnecessary. The mind begins to see identity as something flexible rather than something that must remain perfect. With this understanding, awareness returns to the present moment more easily. The mind becomes less interested in defending who it believes it is and more interested in experiencing what is actually happening. Thoughts still appear, but they are no longer responsible for protecting the ego. They simply come and go. This transformation reduces one of the hidden sources of overthinking. The mind no longer needs to monitor every situation for threats to identity. Instead, it rests more comfortably in awareness itself. Life becomes simpler when the ego no longer demands constant protection. Mistakes become teachers rather than enemies. Criticism becomes information rather than personal attack. Success becomes an experience rather than proof of identity. And in this quiet space where the mind stops defending the self-image so intensely, overthinking begins to lose its grip, because the mind finally realizes something deeply liberating. It does not need to protect a story about who it is in order to be at peace. The mind has already begun uncovering several hidden forces behind overthinking. First, it tried to control the future. Then it tried to correct the past. Then it tried to protect the story it tells about who it is. Each layer revealed another reason why thoughts multiply and refuse to rest. Yet there is still another quiet engine that keeps the mind spinning, even when the future is accepted as uncertain, even when the past is allowed to remain unchanged, and even when identity becomes less rigid. The mind still hesitates before many decisions. It pauses, analyzes, reviews possibilities again and again. Because beneath the surface, a deeper fear often appears, the fear of regret. And this fear quietly feeds one of the most exhausting forms of overthinking. A simple choice appears in life. Sometimes it is small, other times it carries greater importance. It might involve a career move, a relationship decision, a financial risk, or even a personal conversation that feels difficult to start. At first, the mind begins thinking in a practical way. It weighs the options, it studies the advantages and disadvantages, it gathers information. This type of thinking is natural and useful. But slowly, the tone of thinking begins to change. Instead of exploring possibilities calmly, the mind starts worrying about making the wrong decision. A quiet pressure appears. Suddenly, the choice feels dangerous, as if selecting the wrong option will permanently damage the future. The mind begins imagining what life will feel like if the choice turns out badly. What if the decision leads to disappointment? What if a better opportunity was ignored? What if the consequences create embarrassment or loss? What if the future version of the self looks back and wishes something different had been chosen? These questions quickly multiply. Each question produces another layer of analysis. The mind begins examining the decision again from different angles. It studies details that may not even matter. It compares scenarios repeatedly. Hours or even days can pass while the mind searches for the perfect answer. But the perfect answer rarely appears, because the real problem is not the decision itself. The real problem is the mind's fear of experiencing regret. Regret is one of the emotions people try hardest to avoid. It carries a unique weight because it combines two painful experiences at once. It includes the disappointment of a negative outcome and the belief that the outcome could have been avoided. When regret appears, the mind often begins replaying the moment of choice. It compares the chosen path with the path that was not taken. It imagines how life might have unfolded differently. This comparison creates emotional tension that feels difficult to escape. Because the mind knows how painful regret can feel, it tries to prevent it in advance. Overthinking becomes the strategy. If every possible outcome can be predicted carefully enough, maybe regret can be avoided. If the mind studies every risk and opportunity thoroughly, perhaps the perfect choice will appear. This belief leads to endless analysis. But life rarely provides perfect certainty. Most decisions contain unknown elements. Information is always incomplete. Future circumstances will always involve factors that cannot be predicted. Waiting for perfect clarity often means waiting forever. So the mind becomes trapped between two fears. If it chooses quickly, it might regret the decision later. If it keeps analyzing, it feels stuck and exhausted. This tension creates what many people recognize as decision paralysis. Instead of moving forward, the mind remains suspended between options. Thoughts keep circling the same possibilities. Energy is spent imagining consequences rather than living life. Buddhist wisdom approaches this struggle with a powerful insight. The suffering connected to regret does not come only from the outcome of a decision. Much of the suffering comes from the expectation that decisions must always be perfect. When the mind demands perfection, every choice feels dangerous, because perfection is impossible. Every decision is made with limited information. Every action unfolds inside a world that constantly changes. Even careful planning cannot account for every variable that may appear later. Yet, the mind continues believing that the right amount of thinking will eliminate uncertainty. Buddhist teachings gently challenge this belief. Instead of trying to eliminate imperfection, Buddhism encourages acceptance of it. Imperfection is not a failure of life. It is a natural feature of existence. Every human action contains elements that cannot be fully controlled. Every path contains both benefits and difficulties. The future always includes unexpected events that reshape outcomes. When the mind accepts this reality, something important begins to change. The pressure surrounding decisions begins to soften. Instead of demanding the perfect answer, the mind becomes willing to choose the most reasonable option available in the present moment. The goal shifts from controlling the future to acting with awareness and sincerity. This shift transforms how decisions are experienced. A decision no longer represents a permanent judgment about the self's intelligence or worth. It becomes simply a step in the ongoing movement of life. If the outcome turns out well, the mind feels gratitude. If the outcome becomes difficult, the mind learns and adapts. Either way, life continues. This perspective dissolves much of the fear that fuels overthinking, because regret loses its power when the mind no longer expects perfection. Another important insight appears when awareness examines regret more closely. Regret often assumes that the alternative path would have produced a better outcome. But this assumption cannot be proven. The path not taken exists only in imagination. The mind creates an idealized version of that path because it cannot see the difficulties that might have appeared there. The imagined alternative often looks smoother simply because it was never experienced. Recognizing this helps weaken the emotional intensity of regret. The mind begins to understand that every path contains both success and struggle. The choice that was not taken would also have produced its own challenges. There was never a guaranteed perfect outcome waiting somewhere else. This realization allows the mind to forgive itself for past decisions. Instead of treating past choices as permanent mistakes, the mind sees them as steps that were taken with the understanding available at that time. Growth becomes more important than perfection. Buddhist teachings also emphasize the importance of intention when making decisions. What matters most is the quality of awareness present when a choice is made. If the decision is guided by honesty, compassion, and thoughtful reflection, then the mind has already acted wisely. The outcome may still involve difficulty, but the decision itself was sincere. This understanding frees the mind from the endless need to analyze every possibility. A person can pause, consider the situation carefully, then move forward with the best intention available in that moment. Once the choice is made, attention returns to the present rather than continuing to debate alternatives. This return to the present moment is essential. Overthinking keeps the mind trapped in imagined futures where regret might appear. Awareness brings the mind back to what is actually happening now. Right now, the breath continues. Right now, the body is alive. Right now, life is unfolding one moment at a time. Regret belongs to imagined comparisons between past and future. It cannot exist fully inside the present moment where life is directly experienced. The more awareness returns to this moment, the weaker the fear of regret becomes. The mind begins to see that life is not a single, irreversible choice. It is a series of continuous adjustments. Each decision leads to new experiences, and each experience provides new understanding. Even difficult outcomes can open unexpected opportunities. The mind no longer needs to calculate every possibility in advance. Instead, it learns to respond to life as it unfolds. This responsiveness replaces the rigid search for perfect decisions. Flexibility becomes more valuable than certainty. When awareness grows in this way, overthinking begins to fade naturally. The mind no longer feels responsible for controlling every future consequence. It simply participates in the flow of life with attention and sincerity. Decisions still require thought, but the thinking becomes lighter. It no longer carries the heavy burden of avoiding every possible regret, because the mind finally understands something liberating. Regret loses its power the moment the mind accepts that imperfection is part of being human. The mind has already uncovered many of the hidden forces that keep overthinking alive. It tried to control the future. It tried to rewrite the past. It tried to defend the image of who it believes it is. It even tried to protect itself from the pain of regret. Each discovery revealed something important. Much of overthinking is not about solving problems, but about searching for safety in places where safety cannot truly be found. Yet the mind still keeps searching, even after learning that regret cannot be avoided perfectly and that identity does not need constant protection. Another deeper habit continues quietly beneath the surface. The mind still feels restless when it encounters situations it cannot fully predict. It wants to know what will happen next. It wants guarantees. And when those guarantees do not appear, the thinking begins again. This reveals another powerful force behind overthinking, the mind's deep desire for certainty in a world that never stops changing. There is a quiet discomfort that appears whenever life becomes unclear. A relationship begins to shift. A job situation becomes uncertain. A plan starts to unfold differently than expected. Even small changes in daily routines can create subtle unease inside the mind. The mind immediately begins searching for clarity. Questions appear quickly. What will happen next? Will things turn out well? Is this situation safe? Should something be done to prevent possible problems? These questions feel natural. Human intelligence developed partly because the mind learned to anticipate the future. Planning has helped people prepare for challenges, build societies, and navigate complex environments. But the mind often pushes this useful ability too far. Instead of preparing reasonably for what may happen, it begins demanding certainty from life itself. And life has never promised certainty. The world changes constantly. Every moment brings new conditions that interact in unpredictable ways. Weather patterns shift unexpectedly. People make decisions that cannot be predicted. Opportunities appear without warning. Plans collapse even when they seem perfectly organized. Reality is fluid, yet the mind still wants something solid. This tension between a changing world and a mind seeking stability creates a powerful form of overthinking. When the mind cannot find guarantees, it tries to manufacture them through analysis. It begins studying situations carefully. Perhaps if the situation is understood well enough, certainty will appear. The mind gathers information, compares possibilities, and examines outcomes. It searches for patterns that will reveal how the future will unfold. Sometimes this process can be helpful, but when certainty remains unavailable, the thinking continues endlessly. Each answer leads to another question. Each conclusion opens another possibility. The mind keeps searching for the moment when uncertainty finally disappears. But uncertainty is woven into the structure of life. Buddhist wisdom speaks directly about this reality through the teaching of impermanence. Impermanence means that everything in existence is constantly changing. Nothing remains exactly the same from one moment to the next. The body changes, relationships evolve, emotions appear and disappear, circumstances transform continuously. Even the thoughts inside the mind rise and fade like waves on the surface of water. This teaching is not meant to create fear. Instead, it reveals something fundamental about the nature of reality. Change is not an exception. It is the normal movement of life. Yet the mind often resists this movement. It tries to hold on to stability. When something pleasant appears, the mind wants it to last forever. When something uncomfortable appears, the mind wants it to disappear immediately. This resistance creates tension because reality continues changing regardless of the mind's preferences. Overthinking grows from that tension. The mind begins trying to calculate how to preserve the things it enjoys and avoid the things it fears. It analyzes situations carefully, hoping to control outcomes. But since change cannot be stopped, the thinking continues without reaching a final answer. This creates mental storms. Thoughts move rapidly. The mind jumps between different scenarios, trying to predict how change will unfold. The body may feel restless, the breath becomes shallow, and sleep becomes difficult. The mind is working constantly to build certainty in a world that cannot provide it. Buddhist teachings suggest a different response. Instead of fighting impermanence, they invite the mind to understand it deeply. When awareness observes change carefully, something remarkable becomes clear. Change is not only responsible for uncertainty, it is also responsible for renewal, growth, and opportunity. Without change, healing would never happen. Without change, learning would never occur. Without change, painful experiences would last forever. Impermanence makes transformation possible. This understanding begins to soften the mind's demand for certainty. Instead of seeing change as a threat, the mind starts recognizing it as the natural movement of life. The future no longer needs to be perfectly predicted. It simply needs to be experienced as it unfolds. When this shift occurs, overthinking begins to lose its urgency. The mind no longer needs to examine every detail of life in order to feel safe. Safety begins to arise from something deeper than certainty. It comes from the ability to remain present and responsive even when life changes. This kind of stability is different from the rigid certainty the mind once sought. It is flexible. Flexible stability means the mind can adapt as situations evolve. Instead of demanding fixed outcomes, it responds to what is actually happening. Decisions are made when necessary, but the mind does not cling to the illusion that everything must remain predictable. This flexibility produces calm. When the mind accepts impermanence, the future stops feeling like a puzzle that must be solved immediately. It becomes a landscape that will reveal itself step by step. Attention returns to the present moment where life is actually being lived. The breath becomes noticeable again. The body relaxes slightly. The senses reconnect with the environment. Instead of living inside imagined futures, awareness returns to direct experience. Buddhist meditation practices help cultivate this shift. During meditation, the mind observes the continuous flow of change. The breath enters and leaves. Sensations arise and fade. Sounds appear and disappear. Thoughts come and go. Nothing remains fixed, yet awareness itself remains steady. This observation teaches an important lesson. Stability does not require the world to stop changing. Stability can exist inside awareness, even while change continues everywhere else. Once the mind understands this, its relationship with uncertainty transforms. Uncertainty no longer feels like a threat that must be eliminated. It becomes simply another aspect of impermanent reality. The mind can watch it without immediately trying to resolve it. This does not mean becoming passive or careless. Practical thinking still plays an important role in life. Plans can still be made. Responsibilities still require attention. But thinking becomes purposeful rather than compulsive. The mind uses thought when it is useful, then releases it. Instead of clinging to predictions about the future, the mind becomes comfortable responding to the present moment as it unfolds. This response reduces the intensity of mental storms. The mind stops trying to construct a perfect map of the future. Instead, it walks the path step by step. Each moment reveals the next piece of information needed. In this way, wisdom begins to replace anxiety. The mind realizes it does not need complete certainty in order to live wisely. It simply needs awareness and adaptability. When change is no longer resisted, the emotional pressure behind overthinking begins to dissolve. Thoughts become quieter, the mind stops chasing guarantees that cannot exist, and inside this quiet acceptance of impermanence, something deeply peaceful begins to appear. A calm that does not depend on the future being predictable. A calm that exists simply because the mind has stopped demanding certainty from a world that was never meant to stand still. The mind has slowly begun to see something it once refused to notice. The world does not offer permanent certainty. Life moves through constant change, and no amount of thinking can freeze that movement. When this understanding begins to settle inside awareness, some of the pressure behind overthinking fades. The mind no longer demands perfect guarantees from the future, but something else quietly remains. Even after accepting uncertainty and impermanence, the mind often continues running far ahead of the present moment. It begins planning, forecasting, preparing, organizing possibilities that have not yet appeared. At first, this seems responsible. Planning feels productive, it feels like progress. Yet beneath this constant preparation, another experience slowly grows. Fatigue, and this reveals another hidden side of overthinking. There is a subtle kind of tiredness that many people carry without fully noticing it. It is not the tiredness of physical labor. The body may be sitting still, resting even, but inside the mind there is continuous activity. Thoughts are moving quickly from one possibility to another. Plans are forming and reforming. The mind is mapping tomorrow, next week, next year. It feels busy. But something inside feels drained. This exhaustion does not come from action. It comes from endless anticipation. Mental planning has its place in life. Humans use it to organize tasks, prepare for responsibilities, and navigate complex situations. When used wisely, planning is a helpful tool. But when the mind begins forecasting constantly, planning stops being a tool and becomes a habit. The mind starts believing it must always be one step ahead of life. It begins rehearsing conversations that may happen later. It organizes tasks repeatedly, even when the plan is already clear. It imagines problems that have not yet appeared and prepares solutions for situations that may never occur. This process feels productive because thinking is happening. But much of that thinking does not lead to real action. Instead, it quietly consumes emotional energy. Each imagined future scenario requires attention. The mind creates details, anticipates reactions, predicts consequences. Then another scenario appears, slightly different from the first. The mind studies that one as well. Hours pass while the mind explores possibilities. Meanwhile, the present moment receives very little attention. The body may be eating a meal, but the mind is planning tomorrow. The person may be walking outside, yet attention is absorbed in tasks that have not begun. A conversation may be happening, but the mind is already thinking about the next appointment. This creates a strange disconnection. Life is unfolding in front of the senses, yet the mind is living somewhere else. Buddhist teachings often describe this state as a form of subtle suffering, not because planning itself is harmful, but because constant mental projection removes awareness from the present moment where life is actually occurring. When awareness leaves the present repeatedly, the mind begins to feel restless. It carries unfinished thoughts about the future while also responding to current responsibilities. Attention becomes divided. The nervous system remains slightly tense because the mind is always preparing for something else. Over time, this produces emotional exhaustion. The mind feels like it is always working, even during moments meant for rest. This exhaustion often goes unnoticed because the mind interprets its activity as responsibility. It tells itself that constant planning is necessary for success. It believes that if it stops forecasting the future, important things might be forgotten. But careful observation reveals something different. Many plans are repeated far more times than necessary. The mind revisits the same schedule again and again. It rehearses conversations that have already been prepared. It imagines potential obstacles long after practical preparation has been completed. The repetition is not about improving the plan, it is about trying to eliminate uncertainty. By mentally revisiting future events repeatedly, the mind hopes to reduce the chance of something going wrong. It believes that thinking through every detail will make the situation safer. But safety rarely increases after the first thoughtful preparation. What increases is mental fatigue. Buddhist wisdom invites the mind to recognize the difference between skillful planning and compulsive forecasting. Skillful planning is simple and direct. A task appears, attention considers what is needed, and a reasonable plan forms. Once the plan exists, the mind releases it until the moment of action arrives. Compulsive forecasting is different. The mind keeps returning to the plan even when no new information is available. It studies the same future moment repeatedly. Each review produces slightly different imagined outcomes. The mind is not improving the plan, it is feeding anxiety. This pattern becomes easier to see when awareness slows down and observes thinking carefully. Thoughts about the future appear frequently, but many of them do not contribute anything new. They simply repeat the same preparation. This repetition creates an illusion of productivity. The mind feels busy, yet little real progress occurs. Instead of conserving energy for action, emotional resources are spent in advance. Buddhist practice gently shifts attention away from this habit. Instead of living inside future projections, awareness returns to what is happening right now. The breath becomes noticeable again. The sensation of the body sitting or standing becomes clear. Sounds, textures, and colors reappear in experience. This return to the present moment often brings an immediate sense of relief. The mind realizes it does not need to solve tomorrow today. Tomorrow will arrive with its own conditions, information, and opportunities for response. Preparation can happen when necessary, but constant rehearsal is unnecessary. This understanding begins to conserve energy. The mind stops carrying the weight of every future possibility at once. Instead, it learns to meet life step by step. Each moment contains enough information to guide the next action. This approach does not eliminate planning. It simply places planning in its proper place. When planning is needed, the mind uses it deliberately. Once the plan is formed, attention returns to the present moment rather than continuing to rehearse the same scenario. This shift produces a noticeable difference in emotional energy. When the mind is no longer forecasting constantly, space appears between thoughts. The nervous system relaxes because it is not preparing for dozens of imagined futures simultaneously. Rest becomes possible again. Many people discover that a large portion of their daily fatigue came not from physical activity but from mental anticipation. They were carrying the future everywhere they went. Buddhist teachings encourage a different relationship with time. The future is acknowledged, but it is not constantly inhabited. The present moment becomes the primary place where awareness lives. From this place, actions become clearer. Decisions are made when information is available. Tasks are completed with full attention rather than partial awareness divided between now and tomorrow. This approach brings a surprising sense of efficiency. When the mind is fully present, actions often require less effort. Distractions decrease, mistakes become easier to notice and correct because attention is not scattered across imagined scenarios. Mindful presence restores a natural rhythm to life. Work happens when it is time to work. Rest happens when it is time to rest. Planning appears when planning is needed. Thinking quiets when it is no longer useful. This rhythm protects emotional energy. Instead of draining the mind with endless forecasting, awareness moves fluidly between action and stillness. The future continues to exist, but it no longer demands constant rehearsal. And as the mind gradually releases its habit of living ahead of the present moment, a deeper sense of calm begins to grow. Because life becomes lighter when the mind stops carrying tomorrow everywhere it goes. The mind has already uncovered several layers behind its endless activity. It tried to control the future, then it tried to rewrite the past. It tried to protect identity and avoid regret. It searched for certainty in a world that never stops changing. And when that effort became exhausting, it kept forecasting tomorrow again and again, believing preparation would create safety. Slowly, awareness began to notice something surprising. Much of this thinking was not actually solving problems. It was simply noise created by the mind's search for control. As the mind begins to release constant forecasting and returns more often to the present moment, a certain quietness starts to appear. The breath becomes clearer, the body feels lighter, thoughts slow down. But even then, overthinking often returns, not because of the past, not because of uncertainty, but because the mind is holding tightly to a specific result, a result it believes must happen. And this attachment quietly fuels another powerful source of mental noise. There is a moment in many situations where thinking suddenly becomes louder. It might be before an important conversation, a job interview, a relationship decision, or even something small like waiting for a message from someone important. The mind starts imagining the outcome. It begins forming a picture of how things should go. Perhaps the conversation should lead to understanding. The opportunity should result in success. The effort should produce recognition. The message should bring a certain response. The mind builds a clear expectation. At first, this expectation feels motivating. It gives direction to action. It encourages effort. But slowly, something else begins to happen. the mind becomes attached to the result. It starts believing that peace depends on that specific outcome, and once that belief appears, the mind becomes noisy. Thoughts begin multiplying again. What if the outcome does not happen? What if things go differently? What if the effort is not rewarded? What if the result leads to disappointment? These questions do not appear once. They appear again and again. The mind studies every detail of the situation, hoping to control the outcome. It rehearses possibilities repeatedly. It tries to calculate the exact path that will guarantee success. But the future never guarantees outcomes. Life is influenced by countless conditions beyond personal control. Other people have their own thoughts and emotions. Circumstances change unexpectedly. Opportunities evolve in ways that cannot be predicted. Yet the mind continues clinging to the result it desires. This clinging produces tension. The body tightens slightly because something important feels at stake. The breath becomes shallow. Attention becomes narrow and restless. The mind begins watching the situation carefully, looking for signs that the outcome is approaching or drifting away. Every small detail becomes significant. A delay in response feels like rejection. A minor obstacle feels like failure. A neutral expression from another person becomes something to analyze. This is how attachment to outcomes fuels mental noise. The mind is not simply thinking, it is monitoring reality, constantly comparing what is happening with what it hoped would happen. This comparison produces emotional turbulence. If reality moves closer to the desired outcome, the mind feels relief. If reality moves away from it, anxiety appears. Peace becomes dependent on results that have not yet happened. Buddhist teachings speak directly about this pattern. One of the central insights of Buddhist wisdom is that suffering often arises from attachment. Attachment does not simply mean wanting something, it means believing that happiness requires a specific outcome. When the mind becomes attached, it grips the desired result tightly. It refuses to consider the possibility that life might unfold differently. But life rarely follows the exact script the mind creates. Reality is complex and dynamic. When attachment meets impermanence, mental noise increases. The mind keeps thinking because it is trying to force life into the shape it prefers. This is why overthinking often appears strongest around situations that feel important. The more the mind believes a certain outcome is necessary, the louder the thinking becomes. A student attached to perfect grades may analyze every exam question long after the test is finished. A professional attached to recognition may replay conversations with colleagues repeatedly. Someone attached to a relationship outcome may study every message, every silence, every small change in tone. The mind becomes a constant investigator, but investigation does not guarantee control. Instead, it often produces anxiety. Buddhist wisdom offers a different way to approach action and outcomes. Instead of gripping the result, Buddhism encourages focusing on the intention and effort in the present moment. The mind is invited to act fully, sincerely, and with awareness. But once the action is completed, the result is allowed to unfold naturally. This teaching does not mean abandoning goals or becoming passive. Effort remains important. Careful action still matters, but the emotional grip on outcomes is released. The mind learns to separate effort from result. Effort belongs to the present moment. Result belongs to the unfolding of many conditions beyond personal control. When this distinction becomes clear, mental noise begins to quiet. The mind no longer needs to rehearse the future repeatedly. It simply does what can be done now with clarity and attention. After that, life moves on its own. This practice is sometimes described as acting without attachment to the fruits of action. The person still works, still cares, still tries to do things well. But the emotional weight attached to the outcome disappears. Without that weight, thinking becomes lighter. The mind no longer analyzes every detail of what might happen. It simply participates in life. This shift produces a profound sense of freedom. When attachment to outcomes softens, situations become less threatening. The mind becomes curious rather than fearful. Instead of forcing reality to match expectations, awareness becomes open to whatever arises. This openness reduces mental noise dramatically. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer circle endlessly around imagined results. Instead, the mind returns to the present moment where real experience is happening. The breath flows naturally. The body relaxes. Attention reconnects with what is actually taking place. Another surprising change begins to appear as attachment loosens, creativity increases. When the mind is not obsessed with a specific outcome, it becomes more flexible. It can respond to changing circumstances more easily. Solutions appear that were previously hidden by rigid expectations. In many situations, releasing attachment actually improves performance. A person who is not terrified of failure speaks more naturally. Someone not obsessed with success thinks more clearly. Action becomes fluid because the mind is no longer paralyzed by the need for a particular result. This is why Buddhist teachings often emphasize presence rather than prediction. Presence means being fully engaged with the current moment. It means giving attention to what is happening now rather than constantly calculating future outcomes. From this place of presence, decisions become simpler. The mind asks a practical question: what is the wisest action available right now? Once that action is taken, attention returns to the flow of life rather than clinging to results. The future will reveal itself step by step. This understanding slowly dissolves the habit of mental noise. Thoughts become quieter because they are no longer fueled by attachment. The mind stops arguing with reality about how things must turn out. Instead, it participates in life with openness. And as this openness deepens, something remarkable begins to happen. Peace no longer depends on outcomes. Peace appears simply because the mind has stopped gripping the future so tightly. The mind has already uncovered many of the hidden forces behind overthinking. It tried to control the future, then it tried to correct the past. It protected identity, feared regret, demanded certainty, and clung tightly to specific outcomes. Each discovery revealed another layer of the mind's search for safety. Slowly, awareness began loosening these habits. When attachment softened, the mind became quieter. The future no longer needed to be forced into a particular shape. The present moment started to feel more available again. But even when there is nothing urgent happening, even when no decision is required and no danger is present, the mind often begins thinking anyway. It starts searching. It begins scanning the environment for something to fix. And this reveals another surprising pattern of overthinking. The mind does not only solve problems, sometimes it creates them. There are moments in life when everything is relatively calm. The day is unfolding normally. Responsibilities are manageable. Nothing urgent demands attention. Yet the mind refuses to rest. Instead, it starts searching for something that might be wrong. It reviews recent conversations. It studies future possibilities. It examines minor details that previously seemed insignificant. At first, the thoughts appear small. Perhaps something said earlier sounded slightly unusual. Perhaps someone's tone during a conversation seemed different. Perhaps a plan scheduled for next week might contain a risk that has not been fully considered. None of these thoughts are necessarily connected to real problems, yet the mind begins treating them as puzzles that must be solved. The thinking starts quietly. But once the mind believes there might be a problem, it begins expanding the investigation. Possibilities multiply. What if the conversation meant something negative? What if that person is upset? What if the plan fails? What if an opportunity is being missed? What if a hidden risk exists somewhere that has not yet been discovered? The mind becomes an investigator, and it scans the past and the future, searching for clues. But often the problem it is investigating does not actually exist. This habit reveals something important about the human mind. The mind is deeply accustomed to solving problems. Throughout human history, this ability has been essential for survival. Early humans faced constant challenges in their environment. Finding food, avoiding predators, building shelter, and navigating unfamiliar terrain required problem-solving skills. The brain developed powerful systems to detect potential threats quickly. When a problem appeared, attention focused intensely. This ability helped human beings survive. But the modern world is different. Many people no longer face immediate physical threats on a daily basis. Yet the mind still carries the same problem detection system. And when real problems are not present, the mind sometimes invents them. It searches for uncertainty, then treats that uncertainty as a problem that must be analyzed. Overthinking grows from this habit. The mind becomes uncomfortable with calmness. Silence feels unfamiliar. Moments of stillness feel strange because the brain is used to being busy, so it creates something to solve. This process often happens so quickly that people do not notice it beginning. A single thought appears, suggesting that something might be wrong. The mind immediately begins examining the thought. Another possibility appears, then another. Soon, the mind is deeply engaged in a mental investigation. Hours may pass while the brain studies a situation that never required attention in the first place. This pattern explains why overthinking often occurs during quiet moments, late at night, during a shower, while lying in bed, while sitting alone without distractions. When external activity slows down, the mind becomes aware of its own restlessness. And instead of simply resting, it creates a new problem to solve. Buddhist teachings observed this tendency long ago. Buddhist wisdom describes the thinking mind as constantly moving, constantly searching, constantly reacting. The mind prefers activity because activity creates the feeling of control. If the mind is analyzing something, it feels productive. If the mind is solving something, it feels useful. But when there is nothing to solve, the mind becomes uneasy. Stillness reveals the absence of control, and the ego often resists that feeling. So the mind manufactures a puzzle. It begins questioning situations that are neutral. It examines relationships that are functioning normally. It studies decisions that were already made and resolved. This mental habit produces endless loops of thinking because imaginary problems rarely have clear solutions. The mind searches for answers but cannot find them, because the questions themselves are based on assumptions rather than real events. Buddhist awareness introduces a powerful shift in how this habit is understood. Instead of immediately believing every thought that appears, awareness begins observing the thinking process itself. A thought arises suggesting that something might be wrong. Instead of analyzing the situation immediately, awareness pauses. It asks a simple question: is there actually a problem right now? Often the answer is no. Nothing urgent is happening. No immediate danger exists. The thought is simply an idea appearing in the mind. When awareness recognizes this, the mental investigation begins to lose its urgency. The thought can be observed rather than followed. This observation creates space. The mind begins to see that thoughts are events, not commands. They appear, linger briefly, and then fade if they are not constantly fed with attention. Imaginary problems lose their power when the mind stops treating them as emergencies. This does not mean ignoring real difficulties. When genuine challenges appear, thoughtful action remains important. But Buddhist awareness teaches the difference between real problems and mental projections. A real problem exists in the present moment and requires action. An imagined problem exists only inside thought and disappears when attention stops feeding it. Learning to recognize this difference reduces a huge amount of unnecessary thinking. The mind becomes less reactive. Instead of chasing every possibility, it becomes selective about which thoughts deserve attention. This shift restores mental energy. The brain is no longer solving hundreds of imaginary puzzles each day. Attention returns to what is actually happening in the present moment. Another interesting change begins to appear. Moments of calm become easier to tolerate. At first, stillness may feel unfamiliar. The mind may search for something to analyze, but when awareness recognizes this habit, the urge to create problems slowly weakens. Silence becomes comfortable. The mind learns that it does not always need something to fix. Life can simply be experienced. This realization creates a surprising sense of freedom. Without imaginary problems filling the mind, attention becomes clearer, conversations become more present, simple activities become more vivid, the senses reconnect with the world. Instead of living inside endless analysis, the mind participates directly in experience. Buddhist meditation practices help strengthen this awareness. During meditation, thoughts appear continuously. Some thoughts suggest problems that must be solved. Others replay memories or imagine future scenarios. The instruction is simple. Observe the thought, notice its appearance, then allow it to pass. This practice gradually trains the mind to recognize that not every thought requires engagement. Over time, the brain becomes less addicted to constant problem solving. The mind learns that peace does not require solving everything. Sometimes peace appears when the mind simply stops searching for problems that were never there. The mind has slowly begun uncovering many of its hidden habits. It tried to control the future. It replayed the past. It protected identity, feared regret, searched for certainty, clung to outcomes, and even created problems where none truly existed. With each discovery, awareness has gently exposed another layer of overthinking, and something important started to become clear. Much of the suffering created by overthinking does not come from life itself. It comes from where the mind is living. Because when the mind becomes absorbed in endless thought, something subtle begins to disappear. The present moment fades into the background, and the richness of life quietly slips away unnoticed. There is a strange experience many people recognize but rarely question. The body may be in one place, yet the mind is somewhere else entirely. A person may be sitting at dinner with family, but the mind is replaying a conversation from yesterday. Someone may be walking through a beautiful street, but the mind is analyzing tomorrow's responsibilities. Life is unfolding directly in front of the senses, but awareness is not there. Instead, attention is trapped inside a stream of thoughts. Overthinking does not simply create mental noise, it pulls awareness away from the moment where life is actually happening. This disconnection often begins subtly. The mind produces a thought related to the past or future. At first it seems harmless. It might be a memory, a plan, or a small concern. The mind follows the thought for a moment. Then another thought appears connected to the first. Soon attention becomes fully absorbed in the internal story. Minutes pass, sometimes even hours. During that time, the body continues moving through the world, but awareness is not truly present. Actions happen automatically. Words are spoken, tasks are completed, conversations occur. But the mind is somewhere else. This habit is so common that many people believe it is normal. Yet when awareness examines it carefully, something surprising appears. Many moments of life pass almost unnoticed because attention is lost in thought. A beautiful sunset may appear, but the mind is planning tomorrow. A child may laugh nearby, but the mind is replaying a past mistake. A quiet moment of peace may exist, but the mind is worrying about the future. The richness of the present moment is constantly available, yet overthinking prevents it from being fully experienced. Buddhist teachings place great importance on this observation. One of the central insights of Buddhist wisdom is that life exists only in the present moment. The past exists as memory, the future exists as imagination, but the only place where experience truly happens is now. Despite this simple truth, the mind spends very little time here. Instead, it travels continuously between past and future. This movement creates the illusion that life is somewhere else. People often feel that happiness will arrive later when certain conditions are met. They believe peace will appear after problems are solved, goals are reached, or circumstances improve. But this belief keeps attention focused on the future. Meanwhile, the present moment is overlooked. Overthinking strengthens this pattern. The mind constantly calculates what might happen next. It analyzes how to improve situations that have not yet occurred. It constructs stories about possible outcomes. Each story pulls attention away from direct experience. Gradually, the mind becomes disconnected from the simple reality unfolding around it. This disconnection has emotional consequences. When awareness leaves the present moment, it also leaves the place where calm naturally exists. The present moment often contains far less stress than the imagined futures created by overthinking. Right now, the body may simply be breathing. Right now, the environment may be quiet. Right now, nothing urgent may be happening, yet the mind is reacting to imagined scenarios that exist only inside thought. This creates tension. The nervous system responds to those imagined situations as if they were real. The body tightens. The breath becomes shallow. Anxiety appears even though the current moment may be peaceful. Buddhist mindfulness practices were developed to restore balance between thinking and living. Mindfulness does not attempt to eliminate thinking completely. Thinking is a natural function of the mind. It allows humans to solve problems, learn from experience, and communicate ideas. But mindfulness changes the relationship with thought. Instead of allowing thoughts to dominate attention, awareness learns to observe them. A thought appears. Instead of immediately following it, awareness notices it. The mind recognizes that a thought has arisen. Then it gently returns attention to the present moment. Perhaps to the breath, perhaps to the sensations of the body, perhaps to sounds in the environment. This simple shift begins to restore connection with direct experience. The present moment becomes vivid again. The movement of breathing becomes noticeable. The feeling of the ground beneath the feet becomes clear. The colors and sounds of the surrounding environment appear sharper. Life becomes more immediate. This practice gradually retrains the mind. Instead of living almost entirely inside thought, awareness begins spending more time inside experience itself. Thinking still occurs, but it no longer monopolizes attention. Thought becomes a tool rather than a prison. The mind uses it when necessary, then releases it. This balance creates a different quality of living. Activities that once felt rushed begin to slow down. Eating becomes an experience rather than something done while thinking about other tasks. Walking becomes an opportunity to feel movement and observe surroundings. Conversations become richer because attention is fully present with the other person rather than drifting into internal analysis. Even ordinary moments begin to feel more meaningful. This happens because awareness is no longer distracted by endless mental commentary. The present moment reveals details that were previously overlooked. Buddhist teachings describe this shift as awakening from the trance of thought. The mind realizes that much of its activity was not necessary. It was simply habitual. Once this habit becomes visible, awareness gains the freedom to choose where attention rests. The mind can still think when thinking is useful, but it no longer needs to remain trapped in continuous analysis. This restoration of balance brings surprising benefits. Stress decreases because the mind is no longer reacting constantly to imagined situations. Emotional clarity improves because attention is grounded in what is actually happening rather than hypothetical futures. Creativity increases because the mind is not overwhelmed by repetitive thoughts. Relationships deepen because presence replaces distraction. Most importantly, life begins to feel more alive. The present moment is not empty. It is full of sensory detail, subtle emotions, and quiet beauty. But these qualities are only visible when awareness is actually here. Overthinking hides them. Mindfulness reveals them. Each moment of awareness weakens the habit of mental drifting. Each return to the breath strengthens the connection with the present. Gradually, the mind becomes more comfortable, resting in experience rather than escaping into thought. The constant pressure to analyze every situation begins to fade. Life feels less like a problem that must be solved and more like a process that can be lived. This transformation does not require dramatic changes. It begins with small moments of attention. A single breath noticed, a single sound heard clearly, a single step felt fully. Each moment of presence reconnects awareness with life itself. And as this connection deepens, overthinking begins to lose its hold. Because the mind finally discovers something it had forgotten. Peace was never hidden inside endless thought. Peace was always waiting in the present moment where life is actually happening. The mind has begun to see something it once ignored. When awareness drifts into endless thought, life itself slowly disappears from view. The present moment becomes distant, while imagined futures and remembered pasts dominate attention. By returning to the present through mindfulness, awareness reconnects with what is real rather than what is imagined. But another belief still remains hidden inside the thinking mind. Even when people recognize that overthinking disconnects them from the present moment, they often hold on to one powerful assumption. They believe that more thinking must lead to better decisions. This belief feels logical. If thinking helps solve problems, then thinking longer should solve them even better. If reflection helps produce insight, then deeper analysis should create clearer answers. The mind assumes that clarity is waiting somewhere at the end of one more round of thinking. Yet experience often reveals something very different. Some of the clearest decisions in life appear not when thinking intensifies, but when thinking finally becomes quiet. There is a moment many people have experienced without fully understanding it. A difficult decision occupies the mind for hours or even days. The mind studies the situation repeatedly. It weighs options carefully, compares outcomes, and tries to calculate the best possible path. But the more the mind analyzes the situation, the more complicated it begins to feel. Each option contains new uncertainties. Each conclusion leads to another question. Instead of becoming clearer, the decision becomes heavier. Eventually, the mind becomes tired. Thinking slows down. Attention drifts away from the problem. Perhaps a person goes for a walk, takes a shower, or simply stops trying to solve the issue for a while. Then something unexpected happens. The answer appears, not through intense analysis, but through a quiet moment when thinking has stopped pushing so hard. This experience surprises many people. They assume the mind must always work harder to reach clarity. Yet clarity often arrives when the mind stops forcing the process. Buddhist wisdom speaks directly about this pattern. The thinking mind is powerful, but it is not the only source of intelligence within human experience. Beneath the surface of conscious thought exists a deeper form of awareness that observes life continuously. When thinking becomes excessive, that deeper awareness becomes hidden. The mind becomes like a lake whose surface is constantly disturbed by waves. When the water is moving rapidly, the lake cannot reflect the sky clearly, but when the surface becomes calm, reflection appears naturally. Overthinking is like those waves. The constant movement of thoughts prevents clarity from emerging. The mind keeps stirring the water, believing that more movement will reveal the answer. But the opposite is true. Clarity often appears when the water becomes still. This does not mean thinking has no value. Thinking plays an important role in gathering information and examining possibilities. But when thinking becomes repetitive and anxious, it stops producing new insight. Instead of exploring new perspectives, the mind begins circling the same ideas. This repetition creates the illusion of progress. But nothing new is actually discovered. the mind simply becomes more tired. Buddhist meditation practices help reveal this pattern very clearly. During meditation, the mind often produces many thoughts in quick succession. Some thoughts analyze situations. Others imagine solutions. Still others revisit the same questions repeatedly. At first, these thoughts feel important, but when awareness observes them patiently, something interesting becomes visible. Many thoughts contain the same information. They repeat the same concerns using slightly different words. They revisit the same scenario again and again. The mind is not discovering new insight. It is reinforcing its own anxiety. This observation weakens the belief that thinking more automatically leads to better decisions. Instead, awareness begins recognizing when thinking has reached its useful limit. Beyond that point, additional thinking often adds confusion rather than clarity. This realization creates space for a different approach. Instead of pushing the mind harder, attention gently relaxes. The mind pauses. Breathing becomes noticeable again. Awareness settles into the present moment. When this pause happens, something remarkable becomes possible. Without the noise of constant analysis, deeper understanding begins to surface. The mind connects information in ways that were previously hidden by mental tension. Subtle intuitions appear. A direction becomes clearer. This process does not feel like solving a puzzle. It feels more like recognizing something that was already there. Buddhist teachings describe this clarity as wisdom arising from stillness. When the mind becomes quiet, awareness can perceive situations directly rather than through layers of anxious thought. This clarity is different from intellectual analysis. It is simpler. It often arrives with a sense of calm rather than urgency. Instead of feeling forced, it feels natural. Many creative insights throughout history have appeared in this way. Writers often discover ideas while walking rather than while staring intensely at a blank page. Scientists sometimes experience breakthroughs during moments of relaxation after long periods of study. Artists frequently find inspiration when they stop trying to control every detail. In each case, the mind benefits from periods of quiet. The thinking process prepares the ground by gathering information, but clarity appears when the pressure of constant analysis is released. Buddhist wisdom encourages this balance between thoughtful reflection and mindful stillness. The mind can examine a situation carefully. It can consider relevant facts and explore possibilities. But once this initial reflection is complete, awareness can step back. Instead of forcing an answer immediately, the mind allows space. This space gives deeper understanding time to emerge naturally. During this pause, awareness remains connected to the present moment. The breath continues, the body relaxes, the senses reconnect with the environment. Life unfolds without the pressure of constant problem-solving. From this place of calm attention, insight often appears on its own. The mind recognizes patterns that were previously hidden by noise. It sees relationships between ideas more clearly. Decisions feel simpler because unnecessary complications have faded away. This approach also reduces emotional tension. Overthinking often creates anxiety because the mind feels responsible for finding the perfect answer immediately. But when awareness allows space for clarity to emerge naturally, that pressure disappears. The mind becomes patient. It trusts that understanding will arrive when conditions are right. This patience transforms the experience of decision-making. Instead of feeling trapped inside endless analysis, the mind moves between thoughtful reflection and restful awareness. Both phases are important. Reflection gathers information. Stillness allows insight. Together they create balanced intelligence. The mind no longer believes that thinking harder will always produce better results. Instead, it learns to recognize when thinking has done enough. At that moment, the wisest action is often to pause, to breathe, to allow the surface of the mind to become calm, because clarity rarely appears through force. It appears when the mind finally becomes quiet enough to see clearly. The mind has begun to recognize something surprising. Clarity does not always arrive through harder thinking. Sometimes it appears only after the mind releases its grip on analysis. When thought slows down, awareness becomes steady, and insight quietly surfaces on its own. The mind learns that stillness can reveal what endless mental effort cannot. Yet even after discovering that constant thinking does not guarantee clarity, the mind often continues another habit that fuels overthinking. It begins imagining countless scenarios. The mind runs simulations of the future, one after another, as if rehearsing every possible version of what might happen. Each scenario carries its own emotions, its own consequences, its own possible dangers. And beneath this endless rehearsal lies a single, quiet intention. The mind is searching for safety. There is a natural instinct inside every human being that wants protection from harm. The brain evolved to anticipate threats long before they appeared. This ability helped our ancestors survive unpredictable environments where danger could emerge suddenly. But in the modern world, this protective instinct often takes a different form. Instead of watching for physical threats, the mind begins forecasting emotional ones. It imagines awkward conversations before they occur. It rehearses explanations for mistakes that have not yet happened. It anticipates rejection before anyone has spoken a word. This forecasting feels responsible. The mind believes that if it prepares for every possible outcome, it can protect itself from pain. So it begins constructing scenarios. The mind plays one possibility like a scene in a movie. It studies the details carefully. If that scenario looks uncomfortable, the mind tries another version. What if the conversation goes badly? What if the opportunity disappears? What if the plan fails? What if the outcome leads to embarrassment or loss? Each possibility produces another wave of thinking. The mind keeps building scenarios, as if somewhere among them lies the key to avoiding harm. But the more scenarios the mind creates, the less calm it feels. Because each imagined future contains uncertainty. And uncertainty produces more thinking. The mind starts examining every possible reaction, every possible decision, every possible misunderstanding that might occur. Instead of feeling safer, it becomes trapped inside an endless rehearsal. Hours pass while the mind explores situations that may never happen. Meanwhile, the present moment receives little attention. Buddhist wisdom observed this pattern long ago. The mind's attempt to predict every possibility does not actually create safety. It creates tension because the future cannot be fully predicted. Life contains too many variables. Other people have their own choices, emotions, and intentions. Circumstances change unexpectedly. Events unfold according to countless conditions interacting together. No amount of mental simulation can control all of these factors. Yet the mind continues trying. It builds scenario after scenario, hoping one of them will provide certainty, but the search never ends. Because certainty is not hidden inside prediction. This realization reveals something important. The mind is not truly seeking solutions, it is seeking safety. And it believes safety will appear once every possible risk has been anticipated. But anticipation does not eliminate uncertainty. It only multiplies the number of imagined futures. Buddhist teachings offer a different understanding of safety. Instead of locating safety in the future, Buddhism points towards stability in the present moment. True safety does not come from predicting every possible outcome. It comes from developing inner stability that can respond calmly to whatever happens. This idea transforms how the mind approaches uncertainty. When safety is believed to depend on prediction, the mind feels responsible for forecasting every detail of the future. It believes that mistakes must be prevented before they occur. But when safety arises from inner stability, the mind no longer needs to control every outcome. It simply needs to remain steady and aware. Inner stability means that the mind trusts its ability to respond to life as it unfolds. Instead of trying to eliminate all possible difficulties in advance, awareness develops the capacity to meet those difficulties when they appear. This capacity grows through mindfulness and understanding. Mindfulness teaches the mind how to remain present rather than becoming lost in imagined futures. Understanding reveals that many fears exist only inside thought rather than inside reality. When awareness observes thoughts about possible scenarios, it begins noticing something important. Each scenario is simply a mental image. It appears briefly, it produces emotion, then it fades. The next scenario appears. None of them are real events. They are simulations created by the mind. When this becomes clear, the urgency behind overthinking begins to soften. The mind recognizes that imagining danger is not the same as encountering danger. The body may still feel anxious because the brain responds to imagined scenarios as if they were real. But awareness begins to separate the thought from reality. The thought is noticed, it is acknowledged, then it is allowed to pass. This practice gradually reduces the mind's addiction to scenario building. Instead of following every imagined possibility, awareness remains grounded in the present moment. The breath moves in and out. The body rests here. The environment exists exactly as it is. Right now there may be no immediate threat. Right now the mind is safe. This realization calms the nervous system. The mind learns that safety can exist without knowing what the future will bring. Instead of trying to prevent every possible difficulty, awareness becomes confident in its ability to respond wisely. This confidence reduces the need for endless forecasting. The mind no longer needs to simulate hundreds of futures in order to feel secure. It simply remains attentive and flexible. When a real situation appears, awareness responds with clarity. When no situation exists, the mind rests. This shift brings enormous relief. Mental energy is no longer consumed by imaginary scenarios. Attention returns to the present moment where life is actually happening. The senses become vivid again. Sounds, movement, and subtle details of experience become noticeable. Life feels more immediate. At the same time, emotional resilience grows stronger. Inner stability means that even if challenges appear in the future, the mind does not collapse. It adapts, it learns, it continues moving forward. This resilience is far more reliable than prediction. Predictions can fail, scenarios can be wrong, but inner stability remains available in every moment. It provides a foundation that does not depend on controlling the future. Buddhist teachings often compare this stability to the center of a spinning wheel. The outer edges of the wheel move rapidly as life changes. Circumstances rise and fall, success appears and disappears, relationships evolve, but the center of the wheel remains steady. Awareness becomes that center. It observes change without becoming overwhelmed by it. From this center, safety is no longer something the mind must chase through endless scenarios. Safety is already present in the quiet confidence of awareness itself, and as the mind gradually learns to rest in this stability, the endless simulations of the future begin to fade. Because the mind finally discovers something deeply reassuring. The future does not need to be predicted for the present moment to feel safe. The mind has slowly begun uncovering a deep truth. Safety was never hidden inside predicting every possible future. No matter how many scenarios the mind builds, uncertainty always remains. And when awareness learns to rest in inner stability, the pressure to control the future begins to fade. But even after the mind stops chasing endless predictions, another powerful habit can still keep overthinking alive, the habit of thought loops. The mind sometimes catches a single thought and begins repeating it over and over again. At first, the thought appears small, almost harmless. It may be a worry, a memory, a question, or a fear. But once the mind grabs onto it, the thought begins circling endlessly. The same idea returns again and again, slightly reshaped but carrying the same emotional weight. The mind reviews the situation repeatedly as if something important has not yet been solved. And with every repetition, the emotional intensity grows. There is a quiet moment many people recognize. The mind begins revisiting a problem that happened earlier in the day. Perhaps it was something someone said. Perhaps it was a mistake that occurred during a conversation. Perhaps it was an event that produced embarrassment or disappointment. The mind returns to the scene. It replays the moment carefully. Then it examines the details. What should have been said differently? Why did that reaction happen? What does the other person think now? The mind studies the moment as if it were trying to repair something that already happened. But the scene cannot be changed. Yet the mind continues replaying it. Each replay strengthens the emotional reaction. The memory begins producing anxiety, frustration, or regret. The mind feels compelled to revisit it again, hoping that one more round of thinking might bring relief, but relief rarely arrives. Instead, the loop tightens. The mind becomes trapped inside its own repetition. This pattern is one of the most powerful forces behind emotional turbulence. Thought loops take a single experience and magnify its emotional impact. A small concern becomes a large worry. A simple misunderstanding becomes a heavy burden. A moment of uncertainty becomes a constant source of stress. And because the mind repeats the thought so frequently, the body reacts as if the event is happening again and again. Each replay activates the same emotional response. The nervous system tightens, breathing becomes shallow, muscles contract. The body prepares for danger even though the situation exists only inside memory. This creates exhaustion. The mind grows tired from constant repetition. The body grows tense from repeated emotional activation. Yet the loop continues. Many people believe these thought loops are unavoidable. They assume the mind simply behaves this way and that there is little that can be done to interrupt it. But Buddhist meditation practices reveal something important. Thought loops do not continue because they are unstoppable. They continue because they are unnoticed. When awareness becomes absorbed in the content of a thought, the mind follows the story automatically. It believes the thought is important and must be examined carefully. But when awareness shifts its attention slightly, something surprising appears. The thought itself becomes visible. Instead of being lost inside the story, awareness notices the process of thinking. A thought appears, then another thought appears, repeating the same concern. Then another follows. The pattern becomes visible. The mind realizes it is not solving a problem. It is circling the same mental track. This moment of recognition is powerful, because once the loop is seen clearly, awareness gains the ability to step outside it. Buddhist meditation teaches a simple but profound practice. Observe the thought, name it gently, then return attention to the breath. At first, this practice feels difficult. The mind quickly tries to return to the loop. Another version of the same thought appears, but awareness repeats the process. Notice the thought, allow it to pass. Return to the breath. This repeated redirection slowly weakens the loop. The mind begins understanding that thoughts are events, not commands. They appear, they exist briefly, and they disappear. They do not require constant attention. Each time awareness refuses to follow the loop, the emotional intensity begins to soften. The body relaxes, breathing deepens. The nervous system returns to balance. Over time, the mind develops a new relationship with thought. Instead of being controlled by mental repetition, awareness becomes the observer. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer dominate attention automatically. This shift changes how emotions behave. Anxiety often grows stronger when thoughts repeat continuously. The mind feeds the emotion with constant mental fuel. But when the loop is interrupted, the emotional energy begins fading naturally. Emotions behave like waves. They rise, peak, and then fall. But when the mind repeatedly revisits the same thought, it keeps pushing the wave higher. Meditation removes that fuel. When awareness stops feeding the thought, the emotional wave completes its natural cycle. It fades, calm returns. This process does not require suppressing thoughts or forcing the mind into silence. Instead, it requires simple observation. The thought is allowed to exist, but awareness chooses not to follow it endlessly. This creates space inside the mind. Within that space, emotional turbulence begins to settle. Buddhist teachers often compare the mind to a sky and thoughts to passing clouds. Clouds appear, move across the sky, and disappear. But the sky itself remains open and unchanged. When awareness identifies with every cloud, the sky seems chaotic and unstable. But when awareness rests as the sky itself, the movement of clouds becomes less disturbing. Thought loops are simply clouds that keep returning. Meditation allows awareness to remain steady even when those clouds appear. Eventually, the clouds lose their power. The mind realizes it does not need to chase every thought that appears. This understanding creates freedom. Freedom from the constant emotional storms produced by repetitive thinking. Freedom from the exhaustion of mental overactivity. Freedom from the belief that every thought must be solved immediately. Instead, awareness rests quietly. Thoughts arise, thoughts fade, emotions rise and fall naturally, and the mind begins to experience a deeper kind of calm that was previously hidden beneath the noise of endless repetition. Because the true peace the mind has been searching for was never hidden inside the loop of thinking. It was waiting in the quiet space that appears when the loop finally ends. The mind has already begun to notice something important. When thought loops repeat without awareness, emotional storms grow stronger. Anxiety rises, fear expands, and the body carries tension created by situations that may not even exist in reality. But when awareness gently interrupts those loops through meditation, the storm begins to calm. The mind slowly steps out of the cycle and begins to observe thought instead of being carried away by it. And as those loops begin to weaken, something new starts to appear: silence. Not the silence of empty space, but the silence that arrives when the mind stops constantly talking to itself. At first, this silence feels unfamiliar. Many people spend most of their lives surrounded by internal commentary. The mind narrates every situation, evaluates every interaction, and predicts every possible outcome. This running commentary becomes so constant that it begins to feel like reality itself. But when the commentary pauses, even for a brief moment, something surprising becomes visible. Reality and thought are not the same thing. This discovery is simple, yet deeply transformative. The mind begins to see that many of the worries it carries do not actually exist in the world around it. They exist inside thought. A quiet moment reveals this clearly. There may be a feeling of tension in the body. The mind quickly begins explaining that tension. It tells a story about something that might go wrong tomorrow. It builds images of conversations, mistakes, or rejection. But when awareness looks directly at the present moment, something different appears. The body may simply be breathing. The room may be quiet. Nothing threatening may be happening right now. The danger exists inside thought, not inside experience. Buddhist teachings place great emphasis on this difference. One of the most powerful insights discovered through meditation is that the mind constantly produces stories about life, but those stories are not always reality. Thought describes, experience simply is. Thought imagines outcomes. Reality unfolds moment by moment. Thought constructs possibilities. Reality exists only in the present. This distinction becomes clear when the mind enters silence. Without constant mental narration, awareness begins to observe life directly rather than through interpretation. A sound appears, a breath moves in and out, light enters the eyes. These experiences occur without needing explanation, but the mind often adds layers of interpretation. A simple sound becomes something to analyze. A small sensation becomes something to worry about. A passing comment becomes something to replay repeatedly. Each layer of interpretation pulls awareness away from direct experience. Silence removes those layers. When the mind stops explaining everything, awareness returns to what is actually happening. This shift reveals how many worries exist only inside thought. Consider how the mind reacts to uncertainty. A person may send a message and wait for a response. While waiting, the mind begins constructing explanations for the silence. Perhaps the other person is upset. Perhaps something went wrong. Perhaps the message was misunderstood. The mind quickly creates several scenarios. Each scenario carries its own emotional response. Anxiety appears, but none of those scenarios have actually happened. They are mental predictions. When silence is present, awareness can see the difference. Right now, there is simply a phone that has not yet received a response. The rest exists inside imagination. This recognition weakens the emotional grip of worry. The mind begins realizing that it often reacts not to reality, but to stories about reality. Those stories feel convincing because the mind produces them constantly. But silence reveals their temporary nature. A thought appears. It stays briefly. Then it disappears. Another thought follows. Each thought claims importance. But when awareness remains silent and attentive, the thoughts pass like clouds across the sky. None of them remain permanently. This observation changes how the mind relates to worry. Instead of believing every thought automatically, awareness begins questioning it gently. Is this happening right now? Or is this a story created by thought? Often the answer becomes clear. The mind was reacting to imagination rather than experience. This understanding creates space between awareness and thought. Thought can still appear, but awareness does not immediately become entangled in it. Silence acts like a mirror that reflects the difference. In silence, thoughts become objects that can be observed rather than commands that must be followed. Buddhist meditation practices cultivate this silence deliberately. Practitioners sit quietly and observe the movement of the mind without interfering. Thoughts appear, memories arise, concerns surface, but instead of reacting to each thought, awareness simply watches. Gradually, the mind becomes less attached to its own stories. Thoughts lose their urgency. They become passing events rather than permanent truths. In this quiet observation, the mind begins seeing clearly how frequently it confuses thought with reality. A small worry arises. The mind expands it into a large problem. But when silence interrupts that expansion, the worry shrinks again. It is revealed as only a thought. This process reduces emotional suffering dramatically. When the mind stops reacting to imagined scenarios, many forms of anxiety lose their power. The body relaxes, breathing becomes deeper, attention settles gently in the present moment. Life feels simpler because awareness is no longer constantly negotiating with imaginary futures. Silence also reveals something else. Many moments of life are already peaceful before the mind begins analyzing them. A quiet room contains calm. A slow breath contains calm. A moment of stillness contains calm. But the mind often interrupts these moments with commentary. It begins thinking about what should happen next or what might go wrong later. The calm disappears. Silence allows the mind to notice that calm again. Without mental narration, the present moment becomes vivid. Colors appear sharper, sounds become clearer, sensations in the body become easier to notice. Awareness experiences life directly instead of through constant interpretation. This direct experience contains a surprising sense of stability. The mind realizes that reality is often simpler than the stories it creates. Right now, the breath continues. Right now, the body exists here. Right now, life unfolds naturally. There may be challenges in the future, but they are not occurring in this moment. Silence allows awareness to rest inside that moment. Over time, this practice builds trust. The mind begins trusting that reality can be experienced directly without constant analysis. Thought becomes something that can assist when necessary, rather than something that dominates every moment. This balance creates clarity. The mind uses thought for practical tasks, but it also values silence as a source of understanding. Through silence, awareness sees life as it is, rather than as the mind predicts it to be. And in that quiet clarity, a profound realization slowly emerges. Many of the worries that once felt overwhelming were never part of reality at all. They were simply thoughts passing through the mind. The mind has slowly begun uncovering something powerful. Many worries that once felt overwhelming were never truly part of reality. They were thoughts passing through awareness, stories created by the mind trying to predict, control, or explain what might happen. When silence appears, the difference between thought and experience becomes clear, and the mind begins loosening its grip on imagined dangers. But as this clarity grows, another quiet force behind overthinking starts to reveal itself: attachment. The mind does not become noisy without a reason. It becomes noisy when something feels deeply important. When the mind begins clinging to a person, a result, a reputation, or an identity, thought suddenly becomes more intense. The mind begins protecting that attachment as if its survival depends on it. A subtle shift occurs inside awareness. Something that once felt simple now begins to feel heavy with meaning. The mind starts guarding it carefully, and with that guarding comes mental overactivity. This link between attachment and overthinking is easy to overlook because attachment often disguises itself as love, ambition, responsibility, or commitment. These qualities appear positive on the surface. They motivate people to care about relationships, goals, and personal growth. But beneath that motivation, attachment quietly creates tension. Attachment says, "This must not be lost." It says, "This outcome must happen." It says, "This person must see me in a certain way." Once these silent conditions appear, the mind begins working constantly to protect them. Thoughts multiply. The mind starts analyzing conversations carefully, trying to detect signs of approval or rejection. It studies situations repeatedly, hoping to ensure the desired result will occur. It replays interactions to confirm that identity and relationships remain secure. Without attachment, these situations would pass naturally. With attachment, they become mental puzzles that the mind tries endlessly to solve. This is why overthinking grows louder when emotions become involved. A casual interaction may pass through the mind once and disappear. But when attachment enters the picture, the mind begins holding on to it. A single sentence spoken by another person may be examined repeatedly. What did they mean by that? Did it reveal disappointment? Was something misunderstood? The mind circles the event, searching for reassurance. The same pattern appears in ambition. A goal that once felt inspiring can gradually become a source of anxiety when attachment strengthens. The mind begins calculating every possible outcome, worrying about failure, comparing progress to others, and imagining consequences if success does not appear quickly enough. Thought becomes constant because the mind feels responsible for protecting the goal. But Buddhist teachings offer a deeper explanation for this pattern. Attachment creates the illusion that happiness depends on specific conditions, remaining exactly as the mind desires. When those conditions feel threatened, thought becomes restless. The mind tries to prevent loss by thinking harder, but thinking cannot control reality. People change, circumstances shift, events unfold in ways that cannot always be predicted. The more tightly the mind holds on to something, the more vulnerable it becomes to these changes. This vulnerability produces mental noise. The mind keeps asking questions. What if this disappears? What if things go wrong? What if this person leaves? What if the plan fails? Each question triggers another wave of thinking. The mind believes it must stay alert to protect what it values, but this constant vigilance becomes exhausting. The mind becomes like a guard who never rests, watching for threats that may never appear. Buddhist wisdom introduces a different perspective. Instead of tightening attachment, awareness learns to hold experiences gently. This does not mean withdrawing from life or refusing to care about relationships and goals. It means caring without gripping. The difference between caring and clinging is subtle but profound. Caring allows something to exist freely. Clinging tries to control it. When awareness cares without clinging, the mind remains calm even when change occurs. It understands that life moves continuously. People grow, situations evolve, nothing remains exactly the same forever. This understanding is not pessimistic, it is realistic. And realism allows the mind to relax, because once the mind accepts that change is natural, it no longer feels responsible for preventing it. Attachment loosens, mental overactivity decreases, thought becomes quieter because the mind is no longer trying to freeze life in place. A conversation happens, it ends, the mind allows it to pass, a goal exists, effort is applied, but the mind does not torture itself with endless predictions about the result. It simply acts and allows outcomes to unfold. Relationships continue to matter deeply, but they are no longer treated as fragile objects that must be controlled. They are living experiences that evolve naturally. This shift reduces the emotional pressure behind overthinking. The mind becomes lighter. Instead of gripping every situation tightly, awareness learns to participate in life with openness. Thought still appears, but it is no longer fueled by fear of loss. The mind becomes capable of observing change without panic. Buddhist teachings often describe attachment as holding a handful of sand too tightly. The tighter the grip, the more the sand slips away. But when the hand relaxes slightly, the sand remains. The same principle applies to mental peace. When the mind grips outcomes and identities too strongly, anxiety grows. When the grip softens, calm naturally returns. This calm does not come from controlling life. It comes from trusting the ability to move with life. The mind begins realizing that it does not need to analyze every situation endlessly in order to protect what matters. It simply needs awareness, presence, and compassion. With these qualities, relationships deepen naturally. Efforts become more focused. Decisions become clearer, and the constant noise created by attachment begins fading. The mind becomes quieter, not because life becomes empty, but because awareness stops fighting the natural flow of change. What remains is a different kind of strength, a calm engagement with life, an ability to care deeply without becoming consumed by fear of loss. And as attachment loosens, something remarkable becomes visible. The mind does not need to think endlessly to protect what it loves. Sometimes the most powerful protection is simply letting life move freely while awareness remains steady and open. The mind has slowly begun to see how attachment quietly fuels mental noise. The tighter awareness clings to people, outcomes, or identities, the louder the internal dialogue becomes. The mind begins guarding what it fears losing, and that guarding turns into endless thinking. But when the grip loosens, something unexpected happens. The mind becomes lighter. Thoughts slow down because the pressure to control life begins to fade. And from that softening of attachment, another powerful discovery begins to emerge. Acceptance. At first, the word acceptance can sound passive. Many people misunderstand it as giving up, as allowing problems to continue without effort, or as surrendering to life without trying to improve it. But in Buddhist wisdom, acceptance carries a completely different meaning. Acceptance is not resignation. Acceptance is clarity. It is the moment awareness stops arguing with reality. Overthinking often begins with resistance. Something happens that the mind does not like. A situation unfolds differently than expected. A mistake appears. A conversation becomes uncomfortable. A plan fails to unfold the way the mind hoped it would. In that moment, the mind reacts. It begins analyzing the situation intensely. Why did this happen? What could have been done differently? How can this be fixed? What will people think now? The mind searches for a way to reverse the moment or redesign the future so that discomfort disappears. This search feels necessary. But underneath the analysis lies resistance. The mind is saying, this should not have happened. As long as this resistance remains, the mind keeps searching for a solution. It studies the event repeatedly. It replays the scene. It imagines alternative versions of the outcome. The mind believes that if it studies the problem long enough, it might find a way to undo what already occurred or prevent any discomfort from continuing. But this effort creates exhaustion, because reality does not change simply because the mind resists it. The event has already happened. The present moment already exists exactly as it is. And the mind continues analyzing because it refuses to accept this simple truth. Acceptance interrupts this cycle immediately. When awareness recognizes that something has already happened and cannot be changed, resistance dissolves. The mind no longer needs to argue with reality. Instead of repeating the event mentally, awareness acknowledges it. This happened. This moment is real. The situation exists. At first, this acknowledgement may feel uncomfortable. The mind often fears that acceptance means allowing failure or disappointment to define the future. But the opposite is true. Acceptance does not trap the mind inside the situation. It frees the mind from the endless analysis created by resistance. Once reality is accepted, the mind stops fighting the past. Energy that was trapped in mental loops becomes available again. Clarity appears. From this clarity, the mind can respond wisely rather than react emotionally. Buddhist teachings emphasize that suffering is often created not by events themselves, but by the mind's refusal to accept them. A mistake may happen. That moment passes quickly. But resistance turns it into a long mental story. The mind continues replaying the event, criticizing itself, imagining judgment from others, and searching for ways to undo what cannot be undone. Acceptance ends that story. It allows the moment to remain where it belongs, in the past. With acceptance, awareness moves forward. The mind becomes quiet because it no longer needs to solve a problem that no longer exists. This shift also changes how the mind approaches uncertainty. Resistance often appears when the future feels unpredictable. The mind tries to eliminate uncertainty by analyzing every possible outcome. But acceptance recognizes that uncertainty is a natural part of life. The future cannot be completely controlled. Instead of fighting this truth, awareness acknowledges it. Once uncertainty is accepted, the mind stops trying to eliminate it through endless thinking. The need for constant analysis disappears. This creates an unexpected sense of peace. The mind realizes that it does not need to solve every possibility before moving forward. It simply needs to remain present and adaptable. Acceptance allows life to unfold naturally. It removes the pressure to control every detail. This does not mean effort disappears. Effort remains important. But effort becomes focused on action rather than mental struggle. Instead of analyzing endlessly, the mind takes the next step that is possible in the present moment. This step may be small, but it is real. Overthinking often replaces action with analysis. The mind studies the situation so carefully that movement stops. Acceptance restores movement. It allows the mind to acknowledge what is happening and respond directly. The mind becomes practical rather than anxious. Another powerful effect of acceptance appears in emotional healing. Many people carry emotional pain, not because of the event itself, but because they resist the emotions that followed. A difficult experience may produce sadness, disappointment, or frustration. The mind may immediately judge these emotions. It may say that these feelings should not exist. It may try to escape them by analyzing the situation repeatedly. But when awareness accepts the emotion instead of resisting it, something changes. The emotion begins moving naturally. Feelings are like waves. When they are resisted, they remain stuck. But when they are accepted, they rise and fall on their own. Acceptance creates space for emotions to complete their natural cycle. Overthinking is often the mind's attempt to avoid feeling something uncomfortable, but when acceptance appears, the need for avoidance disappears. The mind no longer needs to analyze endlessly. It simply allows experience to pass through awareness. This creates emotional resilience. Instead of becoming overwhelmed by situations, awareness remains steady. Events still happen, feelings still arise, but the mind no longer fights them. This lack of resistance weakens overthinking immediately. Thought loses its urgency. The mind does not need to construct elaborate explanations or predictions. It simply observes. Then it responds when necessary. Buddhist meditation strengthens this ability. Meditation trains awareness to remain present with experience without trying to change it immediately. A thought appears. It is noticed. A feeling arises. It is acknowledged. The breath continues. The body remains still. This practice gradually rewires the mind's response to discomfort. Instead of reacting with resistance, awareness remains open. From that openness, wisdom appears. Solutions emerge naturally when the mind is calm. Actions become clear when awareness is not trapped inside endless analysis. Acceptance reveals that many problems were amplified by resistance rather than by reality itself. When resistance disappears, the mind discovers something remarkable. Most moments of life are manageable. Even difficult situations become easier to navigate when the mind is not fighting them. Acceptance does not eliminate challenges, but it removes the mental struggle that makes those challenges feel overwhelming. The mind becomes quieter because it no longer needs to argue with reality. And in that quiet, awareness finds something it had been searching for through endless thinking. Peace that appears the moment resistance ends. The mind has already begun to discover something deeply relieving. When resistance fades and acceptance appears, the endless pressure to solve reality begins to dissolve. The mind no longer needs to argue with what has already happened, and that simple shift weakens the constant urge to analyze every detail of life. Overthinking loses its strength because the mind stops fighting the present moment. Yet even with acceptance, thoughts can still appear rapidly. The mind has spent years building the habit of constant thinking. Even after resistance fades, mental spirals can still arise automatically. A single thought may appear, and before awareness notices it, the mind may already be several steps deep inside a long chain of analysis. This is where another powerful practice becomes essential. Mindfulness. Mindfulness is often misunderstood as simply paying attention or trying to relax the mind, but in Buddhist teachings, mindfulness is something far more profound. It is the ability to notice what is happening inside the mind without becoming trapped inside it. This ability changes everything. Because overthinking does not begin as a massive storm, it begins as a single thought. A quiet idea appears in awareness. Perhaps it is a memory, a concern, or a question. At that moment, the mind stands at a crossroads. It can either observe the thought or follow it. If the mind follows it, the spiral begins. One thought leads to another. The mind connects ideas quickly, creating explanations, predictions, and judgments. Within seconds, the mind may already be constructing a complex mental story. But if mindfulness is present, something different happens. The thought is noticed. Awareness sees it clearly. Instead of automatically following it, awareness simply recognizes that a thought has appeared. This moment of recognition interrupts the spiral before it grows. Mindfulness creates space between awareness and thought. Without this space, the mind becomes absorbed instantly. Thoughts feel powerful because they appear to be reality itself. But when mindfulness observes them carefully, thoughts begin to look different. They appear as mental events rather than truths. A thought arrives. It stays briefly, then it fades. Another thought appears. It too passes. The mind begins realizing that thoughts behave like waves in the ocean. They rise, move, and disappear. They are not permanent structures. This realization weakens the grip of mental spirals. Instead of being pulled into every thought, awareness becomes the observer of the process. The mind learns to watch thoughts the way someone might watch clouds moving through the sky. The clouds appear and move away without needing to be controlled. This watching does not require force. Mindfulness is gentle. It does not try to push thoughts away. It simply notices them. That noticing is enough to interrupt the automatic chain reaction that creates overthinking. Consider how quickly the mind can build a spiral when mindfulness is absent. A simple thought may appear about something that might go wrong tomorrow. The mind immediately begins imagining scenarios. It predicts reactions, evaluates possible mistakes, and tries to prepare solutions. Within minutes, the body may already feel anxious. The heart rate increases, muscles tighten. All of this happens because awareness became lost inside thought. But when mindfulness is present, the first thought is recognized. The mind sees it clearly. Instead of following the story, awareness returns to something simple: the breath. The sensation of the body sitting, the sound of the environment. This return to the present moment interrupts the spiral. The thought loses momentum because it no longer receives attention. Over time, this practice becomes stronger. The mind learns to detect spirals earlier and earlier. At first, mindfulness may notice the spiral after several minutes of thinking. Later, it may notice after a few seconds. Eventually, it may notice the very first thought that begins the chain. Each time awareness notices the beginning of the spiral, the mind regains freedom. Thought does not need to be suppressed. It simply does not need to be followed endlessly. Buddhist meditation strengthens this ability dramatically. During meditation, awareness watches the breath while allowing thoughts to arise naturally. When a thought appears, the practitioner gently acknowledges it and returns attention to breathing. This process may repeat many times. At first, it may feel like the mind is failing because thoughts keep appearing. But something important is actually happening. The mind is learning to notice its own activity. Each moment of noticing strengthens mindfulness. Each return to the breath strengthens awareness. Gradually, the mind becomes more stable. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer carry the same power. Instead of pulling awareness into long stories, they pass quickly. This stability begins spreading into daily life. During conversations, mindfulness notices emotional reactions before they become overwhelming. During difficult moments, awareness detects worry before it turns into anxiety. During quiet moments, mindfulness recognizes the beginning of mental planning and gently returns attention to the present. The mind becomes less reactive. Instead of automatically following every thought, awareness chooses where attention rests. This choice creates emotional freedom because most mental spirals depend on unconscious participation. The mind feeds them with attention. Without attention, the spiral weakens naturally. Mindfulness removes that fuel. The thought appears, but awareness does not add energy to it. It simply observes and returns to the present. This practice also reveals something surprising. Many thoughts are not necessary. They appear automatically because the mind has developed the habit of constant commentary. But when mindfulness observes them carefully, their importance begins to fade. The mind realizes that life can continue smoothly without analyzing every detail. Actions can still happen, decisions can still be made, but the mind does not need to narrate every moment. This realization reduces mental noise significantly. Silence becomes more frequent. The mind feels lighter because it is no longer carrying endless streams of commentary. Mindfulness also strengthens compassion toward the mind itself. Overthinking often produces frustration. People may criticize themselves for worrying too much or thinking too much. But mindfulness replaces criticism with understanding. It recognizes that the mind developed these habits in an attempt to protect itself. The mind was trying to prevent harm. But through mindfulness, awareness gently teaches the mind a different way of responding. Instead of constant analysis, the mind learns calm observation. Instead of endless prediction, the mind learns presence. This shift gradually transforms the inner experience of life. Mental spirals become less frequent. Emotions become easier to manage. The present moment becomes richer because awareness is no longer distracted by continuous thought. And in that steady awareness, the mind begins discovering something remarkable. Thoughts may continue appearing, but they no longer control the direction of attention. Awareness becomes the quiet center that notices them without being consumed by them. From that center, the mind experiences a freedom it once believed was impossible. Freedom from the endless pull of its own thinking. The mind has begun learning something powerful. When mindfulness appears, thoughts lose their automatic control over attention. Instead of being pulled endlessly into mental spirals, awareness starts noticing thoughts as they arise and gently allowing them to pass. This quiet observation creates space inside the mind. In that space, emotions soften, reactions slow down, and the present moment becomes clearer. But as awareness grows stronger, another pattern begins to reveal itself. Overthinking does not only create noise, it changes how reality is seen. A simple situation enters the mind and slowly becomes something far more complicated than it ever was. The mind adds interpretations, predictions, assumptions, and judgments until the original situation becomes almost unrecognizable. This distortion happens so gradually that it often goes unnoticed. Something small occurs. A person receives a short message from a friend. The message contains fewer words than expected. Perhaps it simply says, "Okay." The moment itself is neutral, but the mind begins interpreting. Why was the message so short? Did something go wrong? Are they upset? Did something I said earlier cause a problem? The mind begins building explanations. Each explanation carries emotion. Concern appears, then doubt, then worry. Within minutes, the simple message has turned into a complicated emotional puzzle. But the original situation never contained that complexity. The mind created it. This is one of the most common effects of overthinking. The mind takes a simple moment and overlays it with countless imagined meanings. Buddhist teachings emphasize that perception is not always a direct reflection of reality. The mind interprets experiences through habits, memories, fears, and expectations. When overthinking becomes active, these interpretations multiply rapidly. A neutral situation becomes charged with imagined significance. The mind begins solving problems that do not exist. This pattern appears in many areas of life. A person may walk past without greeting someone. The mind interprets the action. Maybe they are angry. Maybe they are avoiding me. Maybe something is wrong in the relationship. The mind continues examining the moment. But the reality may be far simpler. The person may have been distracted. They may not have noticed. They may have been thinking about something unrelated. Overthinking rarely considers these simple possibilities. Instead, it gravitates toward complicated explanations. This habit makes ordinary life feel emotionally exhausting. The mind constantly analyzes small details, trying to uncover hidden meanings. Every situation becomes a puzzle. Every interaction becomes something to interpret. But Buddhist wisdom encourages returning to clarity. Clarity means seeing what is actually happening rather than what the mind imagines is happening. This begins with recognizing the difference between observation and interpretation. Observation describes what is directly experienced. Interpretation describes what the mind thinks it means. For example, someone may notice that a friend has not replied to a message. That is observation, but the mind quickly adds interpretation. They must be ignoring me. They must be upset. They must be losing interest in the friendship. These interpretations feel convincing because they arise automatically. But they are not facts, they are mental stories. Mindfulness helps reveal this distinction. When awareness observes a situation carefully, it notices what is truly present. The message has not been answered yet. That is the fact. Everything else is imagination. This realization immediately simplifies the mind's response. Instead of reacting to imagined meanings, awareness remains grounded in what is real. The mind stops expanding the situation unnecessarily. Life becomes lighter. Buddhist teachings often speak about the mind's tendency to create layers on top of experience. A simple event occurs, then the mind adds meaning, then it adds judgment, then it adds fear. Soon the event carries emotional weight far beyond its original nature. Removing those layers reveals the simplicity underneath. The event itself was never the problem. The mental layers created the difficulty. Meditation practices help dissolve these layers gradually. When awareness becomes quiet, perception becomes clearer. The mind sees events directly rather than through constant interpretation. A conversation happens, words are heard. The moment passes. Without overthinking, the mind does not dissect every detail afterward. It allows the experience to exist as it was. This does not mean awareness becomes passive. It simply becomes accurate. Instead of inventing meaning, it observes reality carefully. This accuracy reduces emotional turbulence. Many worries lose their power once the mind sees how much interpretation was added. Situations become simpler. Relationships become easier to navigate. The mind stops creating unnecessary problems. Another important shift occurs as clarity develops. The mind becomes more curious and less judgmental. Instead of assuming negative explanations immediately, awareness becomes open to multiple possibilities. If a friend seems quiet, awareness may simply notice the quietness without creating a story about it. If uncertainty appears, awareness allows space for the situation to unfold naturally. This openness reduces the urgency behind overthinking. The mind no longer feels responsible for decoding every detail of reality. It allows experiences to reveal their meaning gradually. This patience restores emotional balance. Life becomes less like a complicated puzzle and more like a flowing process. Events arise, they move forward, they resolve naturally over time. The mind participates in this flow rather than constantly trying to control it. Clarity also improves communication. When overthinking distorts perception, misunderstandings become common. People react not to what was actually said, but to the interpretations the mind created. A simple comment may trigger defensive reactions because the mind added meaning that was never intended. But when awareness sees situations clearly, responses become calmer. The mind listens carefully. It asks questions rather than assuming. It responds to what is truly happening rather than to imagined explanations. This clarity strengthens relationships. Interactions become smoother because the mind is no longer projecting its fears onto others. It simply experiences each moment as it unfolds. Buddhist teachings describe this clarity as returning to beginner's mind. Beginner's mind approaches each moment without heavy expectations or assumptions. It sees situations freshly. Without overthinking, the mind becomes more flexible. It adapts to reality instead of trying to reshape it constantly. This flexibility creates emotional freedom. The mind no longer needs to interpret every situation as a threat or a problem. Many moments are simply moments. They arise, they pass, and they leave no heavy story behind. Over time, this shift transforms the experience of everyday life. Simple moments become peaceful rather than complicated. Ordinary interactions feel lighter. The mind stops exhausting itself with endless analysis. Instead, it rests in clarity. And in that clarity, awareness discovers something quietly reassuring. Life was never as complicated as the mind once believed. It only appeared complicated when overthinking turned simple moments into endless stories. The mind has slowly begun returning to clarity. When overthinking loosens its grip, situations that once felt complicated begin revealing their simple nature. The layers of interpretation fade, and awareness starts seeing events as they truly are, rather than through endless stories created by thought. Life becomes lighter because the mind stops forcing meaning into every detail. But even as clarity grows, there is another habit of the thinking mind that quietly keeps overactivity alive. The mind constantly demands answers. A question appears, and almost immediately the mind begins searching for an explanation. It feels uncomfortable not knowing something. Uncertainty creates tension, and the mind reacts by trying to remove that tension as quickly as possible. So it starts analyzing, why did this happen? What does it mean? What will happen next? How should this be understood? These questions often feel necessary. The mind believes that peace will appear once every mystery has been solved. It assumes that clarity must come from complete understanding. But Buddhist wisdom reveals something different. Not every question needs an immediate answer. In fact, some questions bring more peace when they are allowed to remain open. There is a quiet strength in allowing uncertainty to exist without forcing it to disappear. This strength appears when the mind stops demanding explanations for every experience. Many of the questions that trouble the mind cannot be answered instantly. Some involve other people's intentions, which may never be fully known. Some involve events that unfolded in complex ways that cannot be simplified into a single explanation. Some involve the future, which has not yet arrived. When the mind insists on solving these questions immediately, it begins building mental stories. It creates theories. It constructs possibilities. It examines each one repeatedly, trying to determine which explanation feels most convincing. But these explanations often remain uncertain. The mind continues searching. It compares one possibility against another. Then it questions its own conclusions. The cycle repeats again and again. Overthinking thrives in this search for explanations. But when awareness allows the question to remain unanswered, something surprising happens. The mind relaxes. The pressure to solve the mystery disappears. Attention returns to the present moment instead of becoming trapped inside endless analysis. This does not mean curiosity disappears. Curiosity remains a natural and valuable quality, but curiosity becomes gentle rather than demanding. Instead of forcing an answer, awareness becomes patient. It allows understanding to unfold naturally over time. This patience changes the emotional experience of uncertainty. When the mind demands answers, uncertainty feels threatening. It creates a sense of instability. The mind believes something is incomplete and must be resolved immediately. But when awareness accepts uncertainty, that tension fades. Unanswered questions become part of life's natural rhythm. Life itself contains many mysteries. People sometimes behave in ways that are difficult to explain. Situations unfold in ways that cannot always be predicted. Experiences occur that do not fit neatly into clear explanations. The mind may want everything to make sense instantly, but reality does not always provide that comfort. Buddhist teachings encourage a different response. Instead of forcing understanding, awareness learns to sit with the unknown. This practice builds inner strength. It trains the mind to remain calm even when explanations are not available. Instead of panicking in the face of uncertainty, the mind becomes steady. It recognizes that not knowing is not the same as being in danger. This realization weakens the habit of overthinking. The mind no longer needs to chase every possible explanation. It becomes comfortable allowing questions to exist without rushing toward answers. There is a subtle wisdom hidden in this approach. Many insights appear naturally when the mind stops demanding them. When the mind becomes quiet, understanding sometimes surfaces on its own. A situation that once felt confusing may slowly become clearer as time passes. Conversations may reveal details that were previously unknown. Perspectives may shift as new experiences unfold. But this clarity often appears only after the mind stops forcing the process. Patience allows wisdom to grow. Another important benefit appears when questions are allowed to remain open. The mind becomes more present. When awareness is not busy searching for explanations, attention returns to immediate experience. The breath becomes noticeable. Sounds in the environment become clearer. Conversations become easier to listen to. Life unfolds without constant mental interruption. Instead of trying to solve life like a puzzle, the mind participates in it directly. This shift creates a quiet form of peace. The mind no longer feels responsible for controlling every outcome or explaining every event. It simply observes and responds as life unfolds. This ability to rest with unanswered questions also strengthens emotional resilience. Difficult experiences sometimes leave behind mysteries that cannot be resolved easily. A relationship may end without a clear explanation. A decision made by another person may remain confusing. An event may unfold in ways that never fully make sense. The mind may search endlessly for reasons, but sometimes those reasons are not available. In these moments, acceptance becomes essential. Allowing the question to remain unanswered prevents the mind from becoming trapped in endless analysis. The mind recognizes that not every story needs a final explanation. Some experiences simply become part of life's unfolding journey. This understanding frees awareness from the exhausting task of solving every mystery. Instead of demanding closure, the mind learns to move forward with openness. Life continues. New experiences arise, new understanding appears gradually. The unanswered question loses its emotional weight. It becomes part of the past rather than an endless puzzle. Buddhist teachings often compare this process to holding water in an open hand. When the hand tightens, the water spills. But when the hand remains relaxed, the water stays naturally. The same principle applies to understanding. When the mind demands answers forcefully, clarity becomes difficult to reach. But when the mind relaxes and allows uncertainty to exist, wisdom appears gently. This quiet strength transforms the inner experience of life. The mind becomes calm in the presence of mystery. Curiosity remains alive, but it no longer creates anxiety. Questions arise, but they do not control attention. Awareness rests peacefully in the present moment while allowing life to reveal its meaning slowly. And in that peaceful patience, the mind discovers something unexpected. Understanding often appears not when the mind demands answers, but when it finally becomes quiet enough to live without them. The mind has begun learning something deeply calming. When questions are allowed to remain open, the pressure to force answers slowly fades. Instead of chasing explanations endlessly, awareness becomes patient. Life begins to unfold without constant interrogation, and the mind realizes that not every mystery must be solved in order for peace to exist. But as the mind becomes comfortable with unanswered questions, another discovery begins to appear, one that quietly changes the entire relationship with thought. Many people live as if every thought that appears in the mind must be believed. A thought arises, and almost instantly it feels true. The mind treats it as a fact. If the thought says something might go wrong, anxiety begins. If the thought suggests someone is upset, worry follows. If the thought criticizes the self, shame may appear. This automatic belief gives thoughts enormous power, but Buddhist teachings reveal something simple and transformative. A thought is not necessarily the truth. It is simply a mental event. It appears briefly inside awareness, just like a sound or a sensation. Yet the mind often treats thoughts differently from other experiences. It clings to them. It assumes they represent reality accurately. But when awareness begins observing thoughts carefully, something surprising becomes visible. Thoughts behave like passing weather. They appear, change shape, and disappear. One moment the mind produces a hopeful thought. A few seconds later it may produce a fearful one. Then it may produce a memory or an opinion. The content changes constantly. If each thought were an absolute truth, reality would shift every few seconds. But reality remains stable. What changes is the stream of mental commentary. Seeing this clearly begins weakening the authority thoughts once held. Instead of believing them automatically, awareness starts observing them. A thought appears. Awareness notices it. The thought might say, something bad could happen. Instead of immediately reacting, awareness simply acknowledges the thought. It recognizes that the mind has produced an idea. Then something important happens. The thought begins to fade. Another thought appears in its place. When this process is observed repeatedly, the mind begins understanding that thoughts are temporary visitors. They do not remain. They do not define reality. They are simply movements within the mind. This realization creates freedom, because when thoughts are no longer believed automatically, overthinking begins losing its authority. Overthinking relies on the assumption that thoughts must be followed. If a thought appears, the mind believes it must investigate it carefully. But when awareness sees thoughts as temporary events, the urge to follow them weakens. The mind becomes capable of letting thoughts pass without building entire stories around them. This shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of becoming trapped inside thought, awareness stands slightly outside it. The thought still appears, but it is observed rather than obeyed. Buddhist meditation trains this ability deliberately. During meditation, the practitioner watches the movement of thoughts without interfering. A thought appears about the past. It is noticed. Then attention returns to the breath. Another thought appears about the future. It is noticed. Then attention returns again. Over time, the mind begins recognizing a simple pattern. Thoughts do not stay unless attention holds onto them. Without attention, they dissolve naturally. This discovery removes much of the fear surrounding thought. People often worry that if they do not follow a thought immediately, they might miss something important. But meditation reveals that most thoughts are repetitive and unnecessary. They repeat the same concerns in slightly different forms. They revisit the same scenarios again and again. Observing them without believing them interrupts this repetition. The mind begins saving enormous amounts of mental energy. Instead of analyzing every idea that appears, awareness chooses where attention goes. This choice restores mental clarity. The mind becomes quieter because fewer thoughts receive extended attention. The space that opens within awareness allows deeper understanding to appear. Without constant mental noise, perception becomes clearer. The senses become more vivid. The present moment becomes easier to experience. Life feels less like a problem to solve and more like an experience to live. Another important change occurs in emotional life. Many emotional reactions begin with thoughts that are believed instantly. A thought says, "This situation will fail." Fear appears. A thought says, "They must be disappointed." Sadness appears. But when thoughts are observed rather than believed, the emotional reaction changes. The thought may still arise, but awareness sees it as one possibility among many. It does not immediately create a strong emotional response. This creates emotional balance. Instead of reacting to every mental suggestion, the mind remains steady. Emotions still arise naturally when real events occur, but they are no longer amplified by endless thinking. The mind stops feeding anxiety with constant predictions. It stops feeding regret with endless replaying of the past. Instead, thoughts pass through awareness quietly. This practice also changes the relationship with self-criticism. The mind sometimes produces harsh judgments about the self. It may say that mistakes define identity or that certain qualities are permanent flaws. When these thoughts are believed automatically, they create heavy emotional pain. But when awareness observes them as temporary mental events, their power weakens. A critical thought appears. Awareness notices it. Instead of accepting it as truth, the mind recognizes it as a passing judgment produced by habit. The thought fades. Self-compassion becomes possible. The mind stops attacking itself because it no longer believes every critical voice that appears. This shift transforms inner dialogue. The mind becomes kinder and more balanced. Observing thoughts also reveals how often the mind contradicts itself. One moment it may predict success, another moment it may predict failure. One thought may express confidence, another may express doubt. When both thoughts are observed without belief, the mind sees how unreliable its commentary can be. This realization encourages humility toward thought. Instead of trusting every mental prediction, awareness becomes curious. It watches thoughts come and go without assuming they represent reality accurately. This curiosity strengthens mindfulness. The mind becomes interested in observing how thinking works. Thoughts become objects of attention rather than commands that must be obeyed. Over time, this practice builds a deep sense of inner freedom. The mind realizes that thoughts are not rulers of awareness. They are simply movements within it. Awareness remains steady even while thoughts move. Like waves moving across the surface of the ocean, thoughts appear and disappear while the depth of awareness remains calm. From this depth, overthinking loses its power. The mind no longer needs to analyze every idea that arises. It simply notices thoughts and allows them to pass. And in that quiet observation, the mind discovers a freedom that had been hidden beneath years of believing every thought it produced. The mind has slowly begun to experience a different kind of freedom. When thoughts are observed instead of believed, their power begins to weaken. They still appear, but they no longer control attention the way they once did. The mind discovers that thoughts rise and fall like passing waves, and awareness can remain steady even while those waves move. This discovery changes the relationship with thinking. Overthinking once felt unavoidable because every thought demanded belief and investigation. But when thoughts are seen as temporary events, the mind gains space. It learns that silence can exist between thoughts, and in that silence there is calm. Yet something curious often happens when silence first begins to appear. The mind becomes uncomfortable. Instead of relaxing into the quiet, it quickly produces more noise. New thoughts appear. Plans, worries, memories, and ideas rush in almost instantly. The mind begins filling the space again. This reaction reveals something important. The mind often fears stillness. Stillness is unfamiliar to a mind that has spent years running continuously. Thinking has become its default activity. The constant movement of thought feels normal, even when it produces stress. Silence feels different. In silence, the mind can no longer hide behind endless mental activity. Without the noise of constant thinking, awareness begins noticing deeper layers of experience. This can feel unsettling at first, because when thinking slows down, emotions that were previously ignored may become visible. Feelings that were pushed aside by constant distraction may rise gently into awareness. A person who spends the entire day planning, analyzing, and worrying may not notice the quiet loneliness beneath those thoughts. The noise of thinking keeps attention occupied, but when the mind becomes still, that loneliness may appear clearly. The same pattern occurs with many emotions. Unprocessed sadness, unresolved disappointment, or quiet insecurity may remain hidden beneath constant thinking. The mind keeps itself busy because busyness prevents these deeper truths from being seen. Overthinking becomes a distraction. The mind produces noise so that awareness never stays still long enough to notice what lies underneath. Buddhist teachings describe this pattern as the ego protecting itself. The ego builds a sense of identity through thoughts. It constructs stories about who a person is, what they have achieved, what others think about them, and what the future should look like. These stories create a sense of stability. The ego feels safe when it can maintain its narrative. But stillness interrupts those stories. In silence, the narrative pauses. Without the constant stream of thoughts reinforcing identity, the ego feels uncertain. Questions may arise. Who am I without these stories? What remains when the mind stops explaining itself? These questions can feel unsettling for the ego because they challenge the structures it has built. So the mind quickly creates more noise. It starts planning tomorrow's tasks. It replays yesterday's conversations. It imagines possible futures, anything that keeps the mind busy enough to avoid resting in silence. This is why overthinking often intensifies when a person tries to sit quietly for the first time. Meditation beginners frequently notice that their minds become extremely active during stillness. Thoughts seem louder than ever. This does not happen because meditation creates more thinking. It happens because the usual distractions have been removed. When the mind finally becomes quiet enough to observe itself, the underlying noise becomes visible. This observation can feel overwhelming initially, but Buddhist meditation teaches patience. Instead of fighting the noise, awareness simply observes it. Thoughts appear, they are noticed, then they fade. Gradually, the mind begins calming. The waves of thinking become smaller. The silence between them becomes longer. In that silence, something remarkable begins to appear. A deeper awareness emerges. This awareness is different from thinking. It does not analyze, it does not predict, it simply observes. And in that observation, many truths become visible. The mind begins seeing how much of its activity was unnecessary. Many thoughts were not solving real problems. They were simply habits. Mental movements repeating themselves because they had been practiced for years. Stillness reveals this clearly. When the mind rests quietly, it becomes obvious how peaceful the present moment can be without constant commentary. The breath continues naturally, the body rests, sounds come and go, life unfolds quietly. Nothing needs to be analyzed in order for existence to continue. This realization can feel liberating. The mind no longer needs to fill every moment with thinking. Silence becomes a place of rest rather than something to fear. In that silence, awareness begins discovering deeper insights. Questions that once seemed urgent begin losing importance. Concerns that once felt overwhelming begin appearing smaller. The mind realizes that many problems were amplified by constant thinking. Without the noise, reality becomes clearer. Stillness also strengthens emotional understanding. When the mind stops distracting itself, emotions become easier to observe directly. Instead of analyzing feelings endlessly, awareness simply notices them. A feeling of sadness may appear. It is felt in the body. It moves through awareness. Then it fades. No complicated explanation is necessary. This direct experience creates healing. Emotions are allowed to complete their natural cycle without being interrupted by analysis. The mind learns that stillness is not dangerous. It is restorative. In silence, awareness reconnects with the present moment. The senses become vivid. The mind becomes calm, life becomes simpler, but this simplicity requires courage, because silence reveals truths that noise can hide. It reveals attachments that may need to loosen. It reveals fears that may need compassion. It reveals identities that may not be as solid as the mind once believed. The ego resists these revelations because they challenge its control, but awareness grows stronger through stillness. Instead of fearing what silence might reveal, the mind learns to welcome it. Each moment of quiet becomes an opportunity to see clearly. Thoughts become less important. Presence becomes more valuable. Overthinking loses its appeal because silence feels more peaceful than noise. Gradually, the mind begins choosing stillness intentionally, not because thinking disappears completely, but because awareness now understands the difference between useful thought and restless noise. Thought can appear when needed, but silence becomes the foundation beneath it. From that foundation, the mind becomes balanced. It can think when necessary. It can rest when thinking is unnecessary. And within that balance, awareness discovers something the noisy mind rarely notices. The deepest clarity often appears not in the middle of constant thinking, but in the quiet space that thinking once tried to avoid. The mind has begun uncovering something surprising. When silence appears, many of the fears that once felt powerful begin losing their intensity. Stillness reveals how much mental noise was created simply to avoid deeper awareness. Overthinking once felt necessary, but now it begins to look like a habit the mind used to distract itself from what lay underneath. Yet, as awareness continues looking inward, another hidden force behind overthinking slowly becomes visible. The way the mind speaks to itself. Many people assume that overthinking happens only because the mind is trying to solve problems, but very often, overthinking is fueled by something more subtle, harsh self-judgment. A mistake happens, a decision does not work out the way the mind hoped, an awkward conversation occurs. Almost immediately the mind begins evaluating itself. Why did I say that? Why didn't I handle it better? What must others think now? How could I have made such a mistake? These questions do not come from curiosity, they come from criticism. The mind begins placing itself on trial. Every detail of the event becomes evidence in an internal courtroom. The mind replays the moment repeatedly, searching for proof that the mistake should have been avoided. This process can continue for hours, sometimes even for days. But beneath the repeated analysis lies a painful assumption. The mind believes it must punish itself in order to improve. It believes that harshness will prevent future mistakes, so it continues the interrogation. But instead of producing clarity, this self-judgment tightens mental pressure. Each critical thought adds more tension. The mind becomes afraid of making another mistake. That fear creates even more thinking. Overthinking grows stronger because the mind is trying to protect itself from its own judgment. This is where Buddhist compassion offers a profound shift. Compassion toward oneself does not mean ignoring mistakes or pretending that difficulties never occurred. It means responding to those moments with understanding instead of punishment. When compassion appears, the internal conversation changes. Instead of attacking itself, the mind acknowledges something simple. Mistakes are part of being human. Every person experiences moments of confusion, hesitation, and imperfection. No one moves through life without missteps. This realization softens the mind. The harsh interrogation begins to relax. Instead of asking why something went wrong with anger, awareness becomes curious. What can be learned from this experience? How can growth emerge from this moment? The difference between these two approaches is enormous. Self-judgment traps the mind inside the past. Compassion opens the door to learning. Overthinking thrives when the mind is afraid of its own criticism, but when compassion appears, that fear begins dissolving. The mind no longer needs to analyze every detail repeatedly. It becomes safe to let the moment pass. This emotional safety creates space, and within that space, mental pressure begins to soften. Buddhist teachings often emphasize that the mind suffers more from the way it treats itself than from the events it experiences. Two people may face the same situation. One responds with harsh self-blame. The other responds with patience and understanding. The external event is identical, but the internal experience becomes completely different. The first mind becomes trapped inside overthinking. The second mind moves forward with calm reflection. Compassion transforms how the mind processes experience. Instead of reacting with punishment, awareness responds with kindness. This kindness does not remove responsibility, it simply removes unnecessary suffering. When compassion is present, the mind still learns from mistakes, but it learns gently. It examines the situation clearly without attacking itself. This gentle learning creates wisdom instead of anxiety. Another important effect of self-compassion appears in emotional resilience. People who judge themselves harshly often become afraid of uncertainty. They worry constantly about making another mistake. This fear feeds endless mental analysis. The mind tries to prevent future judgment by predicting every possible outcome. But when compassion replaces criticism, the fear of mistakes weakens. The mind understands that even if something goes wrong, it will respond with understanding rather than punishment. This reduces the need for constant mental preparation. Overthinking loses its fuel. The mind becomes willing to move forward without needing perfect certainty. Self-compassion also changes the relationship with past experiences. Many people carry old memories that continue triggering overthinking years later. Moments of embarrassment, regret, or failure remain active because the mind keeps judging itself for them. But compassion allows those memories to be viewed differently. Instead of seeing the past as proof of personal flaws, awareness begins seeing it as part of a larger human journey. Every person grows through experience. Every person learns through mistakes. The past becomes a teacher rather than a source of punishment. When compassion touches these memories, their emotional weight begins fading. The mind stops revisiting them endlessly. The story changes. Instead of asking why the mistake happened, awareness recognizes how far growth has come since then. The mind becomes more forgiving. This forgiveness creates emotional freedom. The past no longer controls the present through constant analysis. Compassion also influences how the mind approaches the future. Without compassion, the future can feel like a place where mistakes must be avoided at all costs. The mind becomes tense. Every decision feels heavy with consequences. But compassion removes that pressure. The mind recognizes that the future does not require perfection. It only requires presence and learning. This realization allows the mind to relax. Decisions become easier. Actions become more natural. Overthinking fades because the mind is no longer trying to achieve flawless outcomes. Instead, it moves forward with curiosity and patience. Buddhist meditation practices often include specific exercises for cultivating compassion. Practitioners repeat phrases of kindness toward themselves. They acknowledge their own struggles with warmth rather than criticism. They recognize that suffering and imperfection are universal aspects of the human experience. This practice gradually reshapes the inner voice. The harsh critic softens. A supportive presence begins replacing it. And when the mind feels supported rather than attacked, its need for constant analysis disappears. Thought becomes calmer. Attention returns to the present moment. Life begins unfolding with less tension. Compassion creates a gentle emotional space where the mind can breathe. Within that space, awareness realizes something deeply healing. Overthinking was often not a search for answers. It was a search for relief from self-judgment. And once compassion replaces that judgment, the mind no longer needs to think endlessly to defend itself. It simply rests in understanding. And from that understanding, peace begins to grow naturally. Overthinking often feels like protection. The mind believes that if it analyzes enough, predicts enough, and replays every moment carefully, it can finally find safety. But through these teachings, something deeper has been revealed. Safety was never hidden inside endless thinking. The mind searched for control in the future, certainty in outcomes, explanations in the past, and perfection in identity. It created stories, scenarios, and questions that seemed urgent. Yet again and again, the same truth appeared. Peace was never found in the noise. It appeared in awareness, in acceptance, in silence, in observing thoughts without believing them, in allowing life to move without gripping every moment. Overthinking is not the enemy. It is simply the mind trying to protect itself in the only way it knows how. But Buddhist wisdom gently shows another path, the path of clarity, presence, and compassion. And when the mind stops searching for safety inside endless thoughts, something remarkable happens. The storm quiets. The present moment returns, and the peace that once felt impossible suddenly feels close, because it was here all along. If this reflection resonated with you, share your experience in the comments. What is one thought pattern you've noticed yourself holding on to lately? Sometimes simply naming it is the first step toward letting it go. And if these teachings help bring a little calm to your mind tonight, consider subscribing to the channel for more reflections that help the mind slow down, breathe, and rediscover its natural clarity.